Good morning. Thank you very much for attending this meeting of the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee. My name is Tom Hunt. I'm chair of this committee and I'm leader of Sheffield City Council. The meeting today is open to the public, and thank you very much to everyone who's joined us today. Right at the end of the agenda, there's a closed appendix for item 14, which is not available to the public and press because it contains some exempt information. So we may need to go into a closed session at the very end of the meeting on that particular item. The meeting will be webcast and the recording will be made available to watch through the council's website. We've got a number of public questions from members of the public who are here today. Could I ask that everyone switches telephones off and any of the devices? There's no fire test planned for today. If there is an emergency evacuation, then please follow the council staff who are in the room today who will guide us out. And to begin, I'll just then ask every member of the committee to introduce themselves and then the officers to introduce themselves who are here today as well. Starting on my left.
Good morning, Councillor Ardencio, member for Broomhill and Shadow Vale and Chair of Adult Health and Social Care.
Thanks. Douglas Johnson, Councillor City Ward and Chair of the Housing Committee.
Good morning, Councillor Zahira Naz, Councillor of the Darnell Ward and Chair of the Finance Committee.
Good morning, Councillor Dondale, Councillor for Shire Green and Brightside and Chair of Education, Children and Families Policy Committee.
Fran Belbin, Councillor for Firth Park Ward and Deputy Chair of this committee.
Ben Miskell, Chair of Transport, Regeneration and Climate and Councillor for Park and Albathorne.
Councillor Mike Levery, Vice Chair of Finance, Member for West Ecclesfield and substituting for Penny Baker.
Councillor Joe Watton, Member for Dawn-Totley and Chair of Western Street Scene.
Shafak Mohammed, Councillor for Ecclesall Ward.
Martin Smith, Councillor for Dawn-Totley, Chair of the Economic Development, Culture and Skills Committee.
Richard Williams, Member for Stannington Ward and Chair of the Communities, Parks and Leisure Policy Committee.
Good morning, my name is Diane Hurst. I'm the elected member for Richmond Ward and leader of the Sheffield Community Councillors Group.
Thank you very much, everybody. I just ask the officers to introduce themselves as well, starting on the left-hand side.
Good morning, my name is Claire Taylor. I'm the Chief Operating Officer.
Morning, Greg Fell, Director of Public Health.
Good morning, everyone. I'm James Henderson, Director of Policy and Democratic Engagement.
Good morning, Kate Josephs, Chief Executive.
Morning, David Hollis, General Counsel.
Morning, Craig Rogerson, Democratic Services.
Good morning, Philip Gregory, Director of Finance and Commercial Services.
Good morning, Kate Martin, Exec Director, City Futures.
Thank you very much, everybody. Right, just need to do declarations of interest. Are there any members who wish to declare an interest in any item of the business on the agenda? In addition, for this meeting, because we're considering the budget, members would need to declare any inability to vote on any recommendation, resolution or other decision which may affect the making of the council tax calculation. Are there any interests people need to declare today? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Minutes of the previous meeting, which was on the 24th of January. Are members happy to approve the minutes as a correct record? Thank you. Right, item number 5 is public questions and petitions. We've got no petitions today, but we've got quite a few public questions. And what I should say is that some questions which were tabled for this committee don't fall within the remit of Strategy and Resources Policy Committee, and so those questioners have been invited to ask those questions to the relevant policy committee chair at the next relevant policy committee. The first question today is from Isobel O'Leary. Isobel, if you want to just, come up to the front. Perfect. And then it's the button on the right-hand side.
Okay, thank you. So, given Sir Mark Lowcock's recommendation number 11, which is, I'm sure you've all got this document, the Lowcock Inquiry Report, this is the summary. The recommendation number 11 is that the Council should consider improvements to its information management, both in record keeping and in communication with the public. Can the leader provide specific examples of improvement? I ask this question in the light of my knowledge of specific examples of poor information management recently. These include late or no responses to FOI requests, lack of retention of files that were sent to the Lowcock inquiry, lack of responses to direct emails to offices, and, bizarrely, the apology to the courts being published not in Chef News, but placed directly in the archive. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming this morning. As well as the matters in the report that the Council got seriously wrong, the report also recognised issues that stem from many years of funding cutbacks. We're in the process of making investments into the infrastructures that sit behind some of the issues that you've identified there today, and also investing in our staff, even though we continue to face funding issues as the budget report identifies later on our agenda. The reinvestment is being led by the Future Sheffield programme, which has been reported to this committee before, and we will bring back for updates to this committee, and I hope that you will see progress on the issues that you've talked about. Some improvements will take time, but we are committed to making an open and transparent set of data available on the issues that you've talked about. Specifically in response to the last point, the Street Tree Archive is a publicly accessible resource. I appreciate that there are concerns that I am aware of about its usability, but it is a publicly available resource, and it was set up to ensure that all of the information produced by the Council remains publicly available and in one place. On the decision, or the apology to the court that you mentioned, the Council communicated directly with key stakeholders and interested people to inform them that the apology to the courts had been added to the archive. But look, I will always be clear that we need to make sure we're continuing to improve our performance, and we are moving to a new performance management framework around FL, which will include our performance on FOIs and complaints, and we know that we can do better. Thank you. The next questions are from Mr. Russell Johnson.
Good morning, Tom. Good morning, members, officers, colleagues in the public area. Thank you all for allowing me to be here today. Just as a slight, very short, Tom, preface to my questions. I had submitted, and you made reference to this, 5 questions. I'm only able to ask 2 here today, because contrary to previous practice, the others were disallowed for this meeting. I am allowed to say this, though. And I've headed this question, SCC's continuing difficulty accepting challenge, and this actually overlaps Ms O'Leary's topic as well, I now know. Does the leader share my concern that senior officers are able to underperform by persistently failing to respond to communications, offering only repeated empty apologies when nudged? When they do feel able to communicate, it's really rather meaningless, and manifestly fail to properly carry out their duties with no apparent sanction. B, is it the leader's view that the process currently operating in the Council for monitoring and, where relevant, acting on clear, demonstrated competence questions is currently sufficiently robust and timely, thus ensuring that his council administration, led by Labour, is able to move towards establishing a reputation of competence following years, nay, decades of failure? C, will he personally meet with the concerned citizens on this communications competence issue to confidentially discuss officers' performance, so that he becomes more aware of such issues than is perhaps possible from hearing their narratives alone. D, finally, in this question, would the leader confirm that he believes that all in public service, elected or appointed, should adhere to the Nolan principles and that prompt action is necessary where there is breach? Is this necessary for organisations such as SCC to carry credibility with the public who fund their allowances or salaries? Should I ask the other one now, Tom?
I'll answer this one. Thank you. Thanks very much for the questions. Any matter of underperformance or incompetence is always taken seriously by this council and by me. There are clear processes for tackling performance or disciplinary matters for all officers, including senior and statutory officers of the council. As the leader of the council, I fully support the Nolan principles as a foundation for public service, and I believe that the council has taken a proactive approach to demonstrating this through work such as the Lowcock Report, our LGA peer review, and the Race Equality Commission. But I will always listen to concerns from residents, and if any matters of individual competence are referred to me, I will of course ensure that they are appropriately investigated. Thank you.
Your specific response to the request for a confidential meeting, Tom?
I will always listen to residents when concerns are raised with me. Do I ask your next question?
By what means? Are you saying no to a meeting? Just be clear, please.
Is the meeting with yourself or is other people? I'm saying that if concerns are raised with me, Mr Johnson, I will always listen to them and I will investigate any concerns that are made to me.
By email then, not face to face, is that what you're telling me?
I'm unclear if the request is from yourself, and I think this is probably not a line of questioning that's helpful, but if we want to have a conversation at the end, happy to do so.
I think people here will understand. The other question which I'm permitted to put today is a very short one, and this again happens to overlap with a previous questioner's topic. This is about FOIRs and complaints. Lowcock's ultimate and complete truth, in quotes, tablets of stone, which are his recommendations, were released to the awestruck council last March. This resulted in reassurances that there would be greater openness. However, FOIRs continue to be delayed and obstructed. In addition, some formal complaints have been in process, again in inverted commas, for long periods of time. A, is the leader disappointed by this? B, if he is, does he expect improvement? And I note your answer to the previous question on this subject. And C, does SCC still take the view, once expressed to me by the Chief Executive, that seekers of accountability should just ask, rather than submit FOIs?
Thank you. Well, let me build on the earlier answer to say that I'm absolutely committed to improving performance of freedom of information requests and complaints. This is a key element of the Council's commitment to openness, honesty and transparency. I do understand and I share your frustration and others that progress on improvements in this area has not been quicker. Volumes of new information requests continue to increase year on year, and this is challenging to manage given the Council's significant resource constraints. But I do accept that we can and must do better. An audit of the Council's FOI practices was carried out in May 2023 by the Information Commissioner's Office. An action plan has been developed and agreed by the Information Commissioner's Office, and I fully expect to see improvements going forward. Progress on this will be monitored and performance reporting will be shared publicly. Picking up your last point, many people write to the Council or contact us through the contact centres every day for information and are given swift and accurate support. This is in line with principles of open government. Most of the time, contacting the Council with an inquiry will get the information desired, and by adding more to our archives, we're also finding ways to make information accessible without the need for a formal request. So yes, I would encourage people to ask, but I would also say that formal request routes are important as it enables people to access the information that they need through subject access requests or FOI requests. Thank you, Mr Johnson.
Thank you, Tom. I wish I were more reassured.
There were a number of questions that were tabled today with regards to the Vestry Hall in Burn Grieve, and questioners who tabled them have been informed that the matter does not fall within the remit of Strategy and Resources Policy Committee. Therefore, a substantive response will be provided, but not at this meeting. It is within the responsibility of Communities, Parks and Leisure on that particular committee, and those committee members and the chair will have an opportunity to respond on that at the next meeting of the Communities, Parks and Leisure Committee. So I hope you understand. Thank you very much indeed for coming today, though. It's appreciated. The next questioner who I think is here is Jonathon Feldman. It's the right-hand button, Mr. Feldman.
Great. Thank you. So, as a Jewish resident in Sheffield, I'm keen that my views are not represented by a synagogue I'm not affiliated to. Can the Council commit to ensuring that Sheffield Jews Against Israeli Apartheid will be able to participate in the new multi-faith initiative, especially given that the Employment Tribunal found last week that anti-Zionist beliefs qualified as a philosophical belief and thus also qualified as a protected characteristic pursuant to Section 10 of the Equality Act 2010.
Thank you very much for your question, for coming today. There has been concerted effort to bolster interfaith dialogue over the last few months, including through work with an organisation called the Blackley Centre, who specialise in supporting interfaith relations and convening interfaith conversations. We'll work with faith leaders to support the development of a new interfaith compact for the city, with the intention of launching this later in 2024. We will seek for this to be an inclusive process, involving as many different faith communities in the city as possible. I have asked officers to provide you with a more detailed response in writing to your question.
Okay, thank you. But that's not quite, that doesn't really sort of address that central question about, more broadly about the Jewish community being consulted, the consultation of that community not being limited to the two synagogues that are in Sheffield.
I understand that, and I think it's important that the interfaith conversations take place with specialist advice from officers and from the partners we're working with at the Blackley Centre. Conversations would need to be had to fully address your question, and so that's why we'll come back to you to provide you with a response in writing. Thank you. Got a question from June Cattell. Good morning. It's just on the right-hand side. There we go.
Sorry, got it, thank you. My question refers to item 12, the report on item 12 on the agenda. Your report to this meeting omits any reference to the recent ruling by the International Court of Justice and to immediate measures that Israel should take to prevent genocide against the Palestinian people. In the recent meeting held between the leader of the council and representatives of the steering group of Sheffield Palestine Coalition, it appeared that the leader was reluctant to acknowledge the serious findings of the judges at the ICJ and that it was sufficient for everyone to adopt a wait-and-see approach. So I'm asking now, does the council agree that everybody has a moral duty to do what they can do to prevent genocide? Does the council agree that there are steps that it could take, however small, to minimise the risk that Sheffield Council could be supporting, however indirectly, Israel's actions in genocidal acts against the Palestinian people in Gaza?
Thank you very much. I've been clear throughout this conflict that justice and international law must be upheld, and I fully support the legal process that is underway at the ICJ. I stated clearly at the last full council meeting on the 7th of February that the provisional measures set out in the ICJ's interim ruling must be followed. I said that it's imperative that Israel must comply with the orders of this ruling in full, and that I joined others in pressing for these orders to be implemented. I want to reiterate that the loss of civilian life in Gaza and the humanitarian catastrophe that we see is heartbreaking, and that the UK government should be doing all it can to secure an immediate ceasefire and the restarting of peace talks. I've had constructive conversations on a couple of occasions with the Sheffield Coalition, and I'm grateful for them for taking the time in these discussions, for engaging in these discussions positively, and for taking the time to share their views with me. They have informed the report on our agenda later today. Thank you.
I mean, I think the question refers actually to your response to the ICJ, and what we're asking is for you to think about things that you could do to support the ICJ rulings. Some particular things, not just words, but are there any particular things that you could do?
Thank you. And there is a report later on which touches on that point particularly. Thank you very much. The next question is from Hilary Smith.
Sorry, is this on? Yeah, it's on. No. So my question also refers to the report at item 12. The report refers to a number of demonstrations that have taken place in the city over the last few months. Are you aware that there's been at least one protest, and most weeks more than one, every single week in this city since mid-October, each of them calling for a ceasefire, and that every single national protest in London has been supported by at least one full coach from Sheffield? Is the council aware of any issue in the last 50 years which has resulted in this extraordinary level of protest and active solidarity over a sustained period of time in Sheffield? And yet the council continues to be silent on the question of whether it should put a public statement of solidarity with the Palestinian people on its website. The report that's going to be considered later refers to differing, strongly held views amongst Sheffield residents, but the report and the impact statement characterise these as if talking about groups of people who support different football teams in the city, either United or Wednesday, as if both points of view should be given equal weight and equal consideration by the council. I reject this point of view, and I invite the council to do the same. It is the 2.4 million people of Gaza who are facing starvation and death by a combination of disease, untreated illness, injury, and military attacks by Israel. It is the occupied and oppressed people of Palestine who need our solidarity. This is not a situation where the council should or can stay neutral. Silence in the face of genocidal acts is complicity. Will the council make a public statement expressing solidarity and support with the Palestinian people?
Thank you very much, Hilary. The report that you're referring to that we're considering today makes it clear that deep concerns have been raised by very many people in this city about the violence and the deaths in Gaza and about the unresolved conflict. It rightly states that there are strongly held views amongst the Sheffield population about this, but I wouldn't characterise the equality impact assessment in the way that you have. I don't believe the council is or has been silent on this issue since over the last few months. Indeed, at the council meeting on the 1st of November, the council passed a motion which condemned, quote, the tragic loss of civilian life in both the Hamas terrorist attacks on the 7th of October and the ensuing bombardment of the Gaza Strip by Israel, stated that there can be no justification for the loss of innocent lives and that all atrocities committed against civilians must be condemned and investigated, made it clear that all UK political leaders must call upon the Israeli government to ensure that enough food, water, medicine and electricity is provided to Gaza, that there must be clear humanitarian corridors and that all actors must follow and be held accountable under international law, and called upon the UK government to call for an immediate ceasefire and to vote for this at the UN. The resolution was published on the council's website and was submitted to the UK government. Sheffield is the first UK city of sanctuary and has a proud track record of standing up for those who suffered human rights abuses or fled to Sheffield from oppressive regimes around the world. I know from conversations with you and colleagues that this is a part of the city's history that you and others are proud of, as am I, and I know colleagues around the committee are as well. The report that we're considering later today demonstrates how the council is responding to the concerns raised about the ongoing conflict by many people in the city, and I'd like to thank you and other members of the Sheffield Coalition for taking the time to meet with me twice, to have constructive conversations that have helped to inform the content of the report that we will consider. That report reconfirms the Council's continued recognition of the State of Palestine as a full sovereign and independent nation, and outlines the ongoing appeals for donations to support the humanitarian effort in Gaza. The report also confirms that the Council has no relationship with any of the companies listed in the UN Human Rights Council's latest update. A further report, which we will consider today, recommends that the Council enter into a friendship agreement with the city of Nablus. And the final point I would say is that a vote is due to take place in Parliament this evening on a motion urging an immediate ceasefire, and I am sure that all members of this committee would urge all parliamentarians to vote for an immediate ceasefire, as I do. Thank you.
Yes, I hope everybody in this room will be contacting their MP to call for a ceasefire tonight and not to shamefully abstain or vote against.
Thank you very much. The question next on our agenda is from Val Johnson.
My question is, the Council has been asked on several occasions about the fact that it banks with Barclays. As a major customer of Barclays Bank, will you write to Barclays to ask them if they plan to review their investments and loans to companies which produce or sell arms and weapons to Israel's military? If you're not prepared to do this, can you explain why not?
Thank you very much. The Council's banking contract with Barclays was procured in line with our ethical procurement policy. This allows us to ask for and take into consideration how the contract will generate social value within the city and more broadly. I don't intend to write to Barclays because our ethical procurement policy does not allow us to take into account non-commercial matters that are prohibited, that prohibit this council to take them into consideration by the Local Government Act of 1988. This would include the set of issues that you've mentioned today. We are, and it's out in the report that we'll consider, currently conducting a review of the ethical procurement policy as part of developing a wider commercial strategy for the council. I will ensure that the concerns raised by you and by other campaigners will be considered and taken into account as part of this review. when our banking contract comes up for renewal, we will procure it in line with the law and also with our revised ethical procurement policy. Thank you. The next question is from Calvin Payne.
Okay, thank you. Does the Leader of the Council share my dismay at Sheffield again recently appearing in national news stories for the wrong reasons? What I'm going to describe as a mystery surrounding the Gleadless Masterplan was reported by the BBC, whilst the Market Tavern demolition controversy also saw something else we've come used to in the past, a rejection of expert advice and assistance, this time from Save Britain's Heritage. And if we're to accept the timeline reported in Now Then magazine, an email received from them late morning, 1 hour later, the demolition of said building, and later that evening, an acceptance by the council of the support from Save Britain's Heritage over a building which was by then largely demolished. The reporting has seen a word that we've also come to recognise from the past, misleading. And this is a word that's not just a historic to this council, it's not just about their attitude to the High Court in 2017, but it's now being said about events under the current leadership. Since the Lowcock Report, the council's repeatedly promised that honesty and transparency are at the core of their way of doing things. Indeed, we've heard it already this morning. When will the people of Sheffield start to see any evidence of this welcome new behaviour?
Thank you very much for your question. You've mentioned it. Honesty and transparency are a key part of the council's core values and are important to me personally. We've had an exchange around this. Other people have asked me questions around this. You know that their commitment is there. But what it doesn't mean is that the council won't make mistakes. In the public apology that I co-signed back in June last year to the people of Sheffield, it was very important that the letter said, we will in the future as a council make mistakes, but what is more important is how we respond to that and learn the lessons from when things go wrong. So look, on the two issues that you've mentioned, we are taking steps to move forward with the Gleadless Valley Masterplan, and we'll be able to share more information about that in due course. I want to make it clear, though, that I do share concerns about the Market Tavern. The decision to demolish the pub was not taken lightly, and throughout the process, partners should have been kept fully informed. I am disappointed that this did not appear to have been the case and that people have been provided with inaccurate information. When new information was provided to us, we reviewed that immediately and were open and honest about that. We have written to partners to apologise and asked that an internal investigation takes place to understand exactly what went wrong and to determine any future actions that are required. Thank you. And I understand, Mr Payne, you're asking questions on behalf of Mr Buxton?
I am, yes. Are you happy with that now?
Yes, there's a revised question that I think Mr Buxton sent in this morning. Last night.
I believe so. This is the latest email I've had, so I hope it's the one that's been accepted. Yes, this question does pertain to me as well, so I'm happy to ask it on behalf of Mr Buxton. Following the Council's recent carefully qualified apology to the Lord High Chancellor for misleading courts by representing a meaningless document as a genuine contractual document, in July 2017, Sheffield City Council submitted sworn evidence to Leeds High Court in front of Justice Mayles, whilst in pursuit of an injunction against those protecting Sheffield street trees, stating, for the avoidance of doubt, the vast majority of Sheffield street trees are being retained, that being 30,000 out of 36,000. Has the Council support independent advice from a lawyer to ascertain whether or not this sworn statement was less than accurate, bearing in mind the then secret contractual obligation embedded in the Streets Ahead contract to fell 17,500 street trees, regardless of their health or any other circumstance.
Thank you, Mr Payne. Thank you for asking Mr Buxton's questions. The Council committed to make apologies for those wrongs identified by Sir Mark in his report. The apology to the court does that in full and without reservation based on the inquiry findings. Having set up the inquiry with a broad remit and allowing it to access all of the information held by the Council, including the information that Mr Buxton referred to in his question, we have not re-investigated matters or sought advice where the inquiry did not make any finding. Okay. Thank you very much. That is all of the public questions for today, and I'd just like to thank everybody who asked them today, and for other people who've come who weren't able to ask their questions today, but will have the opportunity to do so at other committee meetings. So thank you very much. Okay. We'll then move, there's no member questions today, so item number 7 is the retirement of staff, and you've got in your packs a report setting out the details of people who are retiring, and I would just like to thank everyone for their long service and contribution to Sheffield City Council. On behalf of the committee and the council, I'd like to wish everybody a long and happy retirement. Our colleagues happy to support that and join me in wishing them well. Thank you very much. Item number 8 is our work programme, and for this I will hand over to Craig.
Thank you, Chair. Members have got the latest version of the committee work programme in their pack. There you will see that there's a number of new items, particularly for March. March is proving to be quite a large agenda. It's probably worth mentioning we've looked to manage that and we've tried to move some stuff on. We've managed to move 1 or 2 items on, but a lot of those issues on that agenda are time sensitive and it wouldn't be appropriate for them to be considered during PERB. Just moving to the report, just three areas to draw to members' attention. There were a couple of issues raised at council recently. One was a petition around the creation of a dedicated BAMER community infrastructure fund. We're awaiting further details on that and we'll update when we can. And there was also a motion at the last council meeting on the climate emergency. There were a number of requests for various committees, including 3 asks for S&R. The report has not caught up with that, but we will pick that up in the next work programme. And then finally, on pages 33 and 34, there are 3 cross-cutting issues that you're being asked to provide a steer on. And we're suggesting that 2 of those stay with S&R. One is framework for growth, and the other one is violence against women and girls, domestic and sexual abuse strategy. And then there's one other issue which was initially suggested for finance on commissioning of social care case management system. Finance have provided some comments and feedback on that and suggested that's perhaps not the right place. So it's over to the committee really to have a think about the best place for that.
Thank you very much, Craig. On those 3 issues, the first 2 were discussed at the pre-agenda meeting yesterday, and colleagues were in support of retaining them at this committee. On the 3rd item about the procurement of the case management system, after this, I was going to suggest that the chairs of Adult Health and Social Care and Education, Children and Families and I have a quick conversation around this. I'll bring in Councillor Argenzia.
Yeah, in adults we've just got a briefing this morning, and the legal, we were made aware that there was still like a back and forth about where it was more suitable. So, but because it's for both services, I was under the impression that couldn't be dealt Because what happens if adults agrees and children says no or vice versa? And it's one system, so would we have two different systems?
I'll bring David in on this, but I think my understanding is that we would be referring it to another committee and they would take a decision on behalf of the council, but you might want to comment on that.
Yes, that's right, Leader. So, yes, it couldn't be referred to both committees, so it needs to be one committee that makes a decision. That would either be Strategy and Resources, or one Strategy and Resources can refer it to one of those that it falls within the remit of. The views of the other would be taken into account, clearly, and I think that's the purpose of the discussion that the Leader's proposing to have with the chairs as to whether the best appropriate way of allocating that work is done.
So, just to be clear, have a conversation with you both about that, if that's okay, and we can work out the most appropriate committee. So, Councillor Mohammed and then Councillor Smith.
I was just going to agree with this not coming to finance, because I think we flagged it previously, and my view was adults, but if you think there needs to be children as well, happy to suggest that, Chair. But I was going to flag it this morning that this ought not to go to finance. But I think
everyone's
you're going to start the process, so
brilliant.
Support it fully.
Thank you, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Tom. It's in regard to the framework for growth scheduled for April. The office is doing a lot of good work on that, but it does talk about priorities for growth, and I just think we need to be very careful about discussing that within the pre-election period, because members around this room might have differing views on what the priorities might be. So possibly sailing close to the wind, I think it would be helpful if officers take a really close look at that. Thank you.
I thought it was going to March. It's going to March. I'm just checking, but my understanding was it was going to the March committee before the pre-election period.
So I'm looking at a page that says it's going to April.
Yeah, it's changed. It's March.
Right, page 34 says April. If it's March, I'm happy. If it's April, as it says on page 34, I'm not.
It's March.
Okay, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. We'll get that changed. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks. I just want to flag up a question about the sill issue. So the one on page 30 refers to the use of sill for BEMA issues, which we've discussed. It says there's a written response. I just wanted to ask if that written response has gone out, and if it has, or whether or not it has, if it can be added to, made public, put on the website for this meeting, so we're all clear about what's been said, just because we're constantly getting inquiries about what the council is doing about this issue. Thanks.
Yeah, we can certainly circulate that. The written response was exactly the words that I replied at the full council meeting, which was, in summary, that there are conversations taking place with the BEMA 5 organisations about this issue, and that we're seeking to bring a report to this committee ideally next month. So very happy to share that, but there's no new information in that written response from what I said at full council 2 weeks ago. Okay, having dealt with those questions, are we happy to support the work programme with that amendment that's required around the growth framework? Okay, thank you everybody. Right, item number 9, the revenue budget and capital programme for 24-25. And whilst Philip joins us, I think it's worth just saying this has been Philip Handley, sorry, it's been a particularly challenging year when I feel the full implications of 14 years of systemic underinvestment in local government are being seen up and down the country. But we can come into that in a minute. Philip and Liz, for the benefit of everyone at home and in the room, do you want to just introduce yourself and then give us a brief summary of the report ahead of us today? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm Philip Gregory. I'm Director of Finance and Commercial Services. I'm the Council's Section 151 officer.
So that stopped him, yes. No, Liz Goff, I'm Head of Finance and Business Partnering.
Thank you very much indeed. Over to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. So the report before you today is the Revenue and Capital Budget Programme for 24-25. This report is a key document in the life and the governance of the Council. The report presents you with the proposed revenue budget, the proposed council tax request, including precept amounts for other bodies for 24-25, and the capital programme for 24-25 and beyond. So it is a legal requirement for every local authority to set a balanced budget before the start of the financial year. The definition of this is that it's a sound plan that shows how income will match expenditure, which takes into account cost savings, local income, and the use of council reserves. This is a challenging process due to the combination of reductions in government funding since 2010, the increasing demand for council services, particularly in statutory social care services, and the increasing cost of delivering services, which in some cases far exceeds inflation, which is seen elsewhere in the national economy. Sheffield City Council has £858 less in real terms per household in government funding compared to 2010, which is a reduction of 26% and a reduction that is higher than the national average of 18%. So the proportion of the council's income from council tax in comparison to grant funding from central government has increased, with a clear policy steer from government that their assumption is that the council will increase council tax by the maximum allowed included within their calculation of our core funding. The maximum increase for council tax for 24-25 without a referendum is a total of 4.99%, made up of a 3% increase in council tax and a 2% increase in for adult social care precept. So my recommendation as the Council Chief Finance Officer is to increase council tax by the maximum allowed at 4.99%. I recognise that this is a difficult decision to recommend in the midst of a cost of living crisis that affects many of the city's residents. The increase for most households is equivalent to £1.17 a week, but we recognise that this may cause some residents financial hardship and difficulty. Included within the budget proposals is an increased £200,000 to the Council Tax Hardship Fund, which increases that to £2.4 million to support the most vulnerable in the city. This is in addition to the discount schemes that already exist to limit the financial burden of council tax on the city's most vulnerable residents. The committee is reminded that as well as setting a balanced budget, it's prudent to ensure that the overall financial sustainability of the council is taken into account. The budget report documents financial pressures in services which, if unresolved, will lead to overspends against the budget. For the council to remain financially sustainable, it's important that mitigations and action plans are put in place to correct overspends as and when they arise during the year. On page 58 of the pack is the statutory statement on the sustainability of the budget and the sustainability of reserves. Part of my duty as Section 151 officer is to review the robustness of our assumptions in setting the budget and in the use of our reserves. The Council has a significant forecast overspend of £17 million in the current financial year. Now, whilst this overspend can be covered by reserves, this isn't a sustainable position in the medium to long term, and any emerging overspend that does occur in 24-25 must be contained to avoid threatening the financial sustainability of the Council. With this in mind, officers are already working on our approach to the 2025 budget to safeguard our financial sustainability. The savings that are proposed in Appendix 2 of the report have been reviewed and have been assessed as deliverable. The Council has improved the proportion of budget improvement plans, known as BIPs or savings, and we've been careful not to include heroic saving plans that can't be delivered. Part B of the report, from page 207 of the pack, is the capital strategy. This sets out the capital programme for 24 to 29, with a longer-term view of capital plans all the way out to 2054. The content of the capital strategy is split by policy committee, and the content has been approved through each policy committee before being consolidated into this overall strategy before you today. Individual capital schemes will be approved by the relevant policy committee. The impact and range of projects that the Council fund through the capital programme can be seen in the document, with the capital programme totalling almost £800 million. Page 235 of the pack shows how we plan to fund the capital programme and the available funding sources, whilst page 243 documents the governance arrangements for the capital programme. Included within the report are several key appendices that I will draw your attention to. So our reserve strategy in Appendix 5 shows how the Council plan to use our usable reserves, which total around £300 million. although it's worth noting most of these reserves are already earmarked with specific uses. The Council's General Fund reserve stands at £15.1 million, which at 3% of net budget is considered appropriate. The Council's Treasury Management Strategy is included in Appendix 7. This sets out our compliance with the CIPFA Prudential Code, as well as guidance from CIPFA and DLUC on investments and capital financing. Treasury Management ensures that the Council has the cash required to fund our operations and the investment of any surplus cash, as well as the financing for capital transactions. The strategy sets out the Council's prudential indicators, including our borrowing limits, our approach to debt and our current debt portfolio. The strategy sets out our minimum revenue provision, the policy of that, and the Council are asked to approve this when they meet in March to ensure that the Council pays down debt in an appropriate way. The Council continues to be under-borrowed, which is where the Council's resources are used to fund capital spend rather than borrowing. As we receive lower interest on our balances than we pay on borrowing, this is a financially advantageous approach. Appendix 8 is our pay policy statement for 24-25, which we are required to publish for full Council to approve. The pay policy includes remuneration for chief officers, our exit cost policy, the policy on remunerating the lowest paid in the workforce, and the approval route for salary packages in excess of £100,000. Any amendments that may be required during the year will need further approval by full Council. Appendix 9 is the Equality Impact Assessment, which includes consideration of the responses to the budget consultation, which are already included in the main report. Whilst the response rate across the city improved compared to previous years, the engagement rate is still low, and we will continue to consider how we can improve engagement and consultation with residents on budget proposals in the future. Appendix 10 is the Council's tax strategy. Whilst we're not required to publish a tax strategy, we choose to do so to transparently document our approach to the management of our tax affairs. The Council seeks to lead by example in how we handle our tax affairs, and we take all reasonable steps to pay the right tax at the right time. The Council has a low risk appetite to tax, and whilst we undertake reasonable steps to minimise our tax liability, we won't use artificial structures or undertake transactions to evade or avoid tax, maintaining a commitment to our ethical procurement policy. So this committee is asked to support the recommendations to full Council, which are documented on page 107 of the pack, for consideration at the meeting of full Council in March. A supplementary paper has been published which sets out the precept for the South Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Authority and the impact on the Council tax calculation with a revised Appendix 6. In addition, the Finance Committee agreed to submit 2 premium council tax charges to bring forward the 100% premium for long-term empty properties from 2 years to 1 year from April 2024, and to introduce a second homes premium of 100% from the 1st of April 2025. Finally, in the report to full Council last year, a recommendation was included to delegate the formal approval of fees and charge increases to the relevant director, which we'd also like to include in the report to full Council this year, with this committee's support as an additional recommendation. In conclusion, the budget report sets out how the Council will use its resources to deliver against an ambitious Council plan, which is also on the agenda for this meeting. The mission of the Council plan is "Together we get things done," and this sets the tone for how we've got to a balanced position for 24-25. I would like to pay particular thanks to the finance team who have worked over many months to pull together the information before you. The collaboration between officers and members across the Council has also demonstrated how we live our values. So Liz and I will be happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that comprehensive run through the budget papers, and I echo that thanks. Can I see, I've already, Councillor Naz, you already indicated to me before, and then I've got Councillor Levery, Councillor Johnson, and then Councillors. I'll take those 3 first. Councillor Naz, Councillor Levery, Councillor Johnson, and then I'll do another round. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. And as Chair of the Finance Committee, I would like to express my gratitude and thank the team for all the hard work for getting us in this position. It has been a challenging year, and we have got difficult years ahead. The fact remains that Sheffield has 26% or 858 per household less to spend in real terms, but we ensure that we protect key services for Sheffielders by working cross-party we delivered for Sheffield. We have seen a devastating impact of the Tory cuts that have crippled councils up and down the country. We've taken stock in Sheffield and I appreciate things won't get easier over the coming years, but I am immensely proud of what we delivered. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Naz. Councillor Levery.
Thank you, Chair. And again, I'd echo Councillor Naz's comments about the team and how well they've worked this year. 2 or 3 questions on this. Last year, we used £5 million of reserves to bail out the budget. This year, it's gone up to 17.4. How much confidence have we got? That's the first question, in next year's budget, and that it will be brought back down again.
Do you have further questions do you want to ask? Do you want to ask them now? And then, because I'm going to take Councillor Johnson.
Okay. Second thing is the collection fund. Now, over recent years, we've shown a surplus of 2.1 and 2.6 million. But this year, we're anticipating 8.2 increase. Can you explain how we've arrived at that prediction for this year? And finally, it's just something to note that finally, after all these years, we've paid off the external debt on the major sporting facilities, so perhaps we can announce this as a landmark that we've finally got there and we can do something about moving forward with our sporting facilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks. It's going to be quite a day, actually, when we don't have the Lib Dems talking about the World Student Games. That is going to be the end of an era, isn't it? So, you know, I'm sure you'll be able to milk it for a bit longer. I hope so, otherwise we'll miss it on the end time. I was just going to say, obviously, this report is for taking forward to full council, so absolutely fine to go with that. Massive thanks, actually, to the officers, all the team, for actually coming up with a balanced budget in these incredibly challenging times, like Councillor Naz has just referred to, and which you've completely identified in the report there. Also credit to actually the way that the whole budget process has been conducted. So, thanks to everyone in the room for making that happen. And it's a very different sort of process from what we had just a few years ago, where it was absolutely combative, mired in secrecy. And actually, we're pretty well all on board with this. You know, there's lots of things in here that we'd rather not do if we had more money, but it's very much a focus on addressing the reality of where we are, facing up the future, and remembering that, you know, the whole point about doing this budget with its massive papers here is to serve the residents of Sheffield in the best possible way we can. So thanks to everyone for that. And yeah, I'll just happily support this going forward, and I'm sure we'll hear more about it on the 6th of March.
Okay, thank you very much. Given that there's a few comments here and less questions, I'll take Councillor Smith as well and then come back to Philip and Liz.
Okay, thank you, Chair. It is a question. There's a phrase that you used I've never been able to quite get my head around when you said the council's under-borrowed. I mean, the amount of borrowing is eye-wateringly large to a lay person. So could you just clarify what a finance person means when they say we're under-borrowed when we've borrowed hundreds of millions? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Philip and Liz.
So in terms of the first question around confidence in budget performance, it's incredibly challenging times, and I think the growth in the overspend is as a result of particular circumstances and issues which we've described throughout the year in terms of social care placement costs. We haven't seen a huge growth in the number of social care placements. There are a number of social care placements which cost an incredible amount of money, and those are where we've seen particular pressure, especially in children's. In addition to that, there's temporary and supported accommodation, which is costing us an incredible amount of money. Work is underway on all of those work streams to mitigate and work through some of those issues to limit that. However, there is a significant risk that we will not be able to mitigate that throughout the whole of the next year, and that will result in financial pressure that we'll need to deal with as the next year goes forwards. What we are clear on is that, notwithstanding those particular issues, we expect people to be able to live within their budgets, and we'll be challenging them as and when they appear not to be able to do that, and as and when overspends and pressures emerge. Part of our due diligence is to monitor and support people to help them find mitigations and recovery plans, which will be taking forward in earnest throughout 24-25. So we're not resting on our laurels in any way. We're not saying that this is acceptable, but it is where we are. And we've got some significant pressures that we will continue to face in the next financial year whilst we work to address them. Some of those are not quick fixes that we find solutions for straight away. I'll hand over to Liz to speak about the collection fund surplus and where that's emerged from.
Thank you, Philip. Yes, it's we've got better data working with the valuation office, so we've got a bit of a one-off benefit this time coming through, and the main reason is about the appeals we've got coming through. So that's given us a one-off 8.2 million increase for this year.
I'm sure we can find some wording to celebrate the major sporting facilities debt being paid, which everyone will be able to support. And then in terms of under borrowing, so we have a borrowing requirement. We also have a cash balance. And so the difference of where we're under borrowed is where we choose to use our cash balance to pay for the capital programme rather than borrow money. So technically we could go and borrow the money to pay for the whole capital programme. We choose to use our cash reserves, so cash in the bank, rather than borrow more money. So we therefore have a lower return from our investments because we use that cash to spend on our capital programme. So we don't get an investment return, so interest back on that cash balance. That's cheaper than it would be to borrow the money. So the debt cost would be higher than we get from borrowing. Within the pack, there is a new benchmark that we've included on page 142 and 143, which is the liability benchmark. The chart there shows how that borrowing requirement exists. So the bars show the spend. There is a line there that shows what our capital financing requirement is. So that's the blue line on that chart on page 143. The liability benchmark shows how much borrowing requirement we might need in future, where we don't have available funds, and where the borrowing requirement therefore will be serviced by external debt.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Hurst wants to come in, and then can I just see if there's anyone else who wants to come in? Councillor Williams. Councillor Hurst, Councillor Williams. Thank you.
Thank you. And can I say thank you, Philip and Liz, for your help in constructing our budget amendment. My question is about the reserves as a percentage of the net revenue budget. Now, I can see that we have, we're holding a number of funds that are earmarked for projects driven by certain funding streams and to support those projects. And those will disappear if we spend in a timely way. But I feel like a stuck record here because I always used to ask this question at audit and standards. How comfortable do you feel with the unearmarked reserves level for you know, a large city, one of the core cities, and knowing that in the past it's those unearmarked reserves that have got us out of crises with the floods in 2007, for example?
Thank you very much. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your report. Very, very comprehensive. I think it's yesterday there was all over the BBC the frightening news from Birmingham, and it's very pleasing to see that we're nowhere near that. So thank you. Small point. You said towards the end of your initial report that when it came to fees and charges, this was going to be the responsibility of the individual directors. Is that a move away from bringing it through the committees? Because I know certainly in my committee, it's always a decision made by the committee rather than directors. Has that been a change?
Okay, Thank you very much, Councillor Williams. So, question from Councillor Hurst, and then I think David wants to come in on Councillor Williams's question. You may want to as well, but I'll come to Philip and Liz first.
Yeah, thank you. So on reserves, there's a chart on page 120 that shows those core cities and the percentage of reserves held. You can see the blue bar at the bottom, which is the unearmarked reserve, does fluctuate between various councils in the approach that they take. So I think I'm confident that we've got the right reserves in the right place. However, if we did have an emergency situation that required us to use reserves in a different way, we do have the flexibility to do that. We can unearmark reserves if we need to. Whilst we've set them aside for specific purposes, part of the review of reserves is to see, do we still need those reserves in the way that we thought we did? And can we release those and repurpose them to use them in different ways? So whilst the general reserves, the unearmarked reserve, is comparatively low in comparison to other authorities, it's still within the bounds of reasonableness. It's still a reasonable amount. We'll keep that under review because the size of the net budget does increase, and over time the net budget increases and that reserve will have to increase just to keep pace with that sort of 3% benchmark amount. But certainly it doesn't give me any concern that our unearmarked reserve sits at 15 million.
Yes, thank you. This isn't a change to the general reservations or delegations, so it will remain that fees and charges are reserved to policy committees. This will be a specific delegation and it will be limited only to those fees and charges increases that relate to the savings that have been considered already by policy committees. So although policy committees have considered them, they didn't make a formal decision to increase them because they were looking at it from a budgetary purpose rather than a decision to increase it. So rather than bring them back, this is a specific delegation for that formal decision to be made by the relevant director, rather than taking things back to a policy committee, which in principle they've already approved. So, and that's the specific, and it will be limited to those circumstances. We did the same last year. So.
Okay, thank you. Anything further you want to add on that? No? Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much indeed then. So, we have a recommendation which is in the agenda item 9 supplementary report, which everyone should have on their desks. The headline recommendation, which is as regards to the budget, the revenue budget, this committee approves for submission to the meeting of the City Council on 6th of March 2024 the recommendations in the revenue budget report as set out below, and there are quite a lot, A to P, and then the additional scheme of delegation around fees and charges that has been mentioned today. There is then a second recommendation, which I'll come to in a second, around the capital strategy. But first, on the revenue budget, our colleagues happy to support that recommendation that we approve it for submission to the City Council on 6th of March. Okay, thank you very much. Second recommendation is on page 208 of the pack that you've got, which is that Strategy and Resources Committee is recommended to pass to full council that it approves the contents of the capital strategy and the specific projects included in the years 24-25 to 28-29, and that block allocations are included within the programme for noting at this stage, and detailed proposals will be brought back for separate member approval as part of the monthly monitoring procedures, and that it approves the proposed capital programme for the next 5 years to 28-29 as per section F of the capital report. Our colleagues happy to support those recommendations. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you both. Item number 10 is our council plan 24 to 28, entitled Together We Get Things Done, which we've already heard about today. And for the benefit of everyone watching at home and here in the room today, perhaps you could both just introduce yourselves and then give us a brief summary of the report. Thank you.
Yes, hello, I'm Kate Josephs, Chief Executive.
Good morning, I'm Laurie Brennan, I'm the Head of Policy and Partnerships.
Great, thank you, Chair. So, lovely to be here again, talking about the council plan. This really is a milestone moment for us as a council, and I and all of the strategic leadership team are very proud to present this plan to Strategy and Resources Committee this morning. We talked about this in December, and the council plan, to reiterate, sets out for our staff, our partners, and most importantly of all, the people of Sheffield, who we are, what we stand for, and the outcomes that we are committed to achieving over the next 4 years. Linking to the previous item, the priorities and outcomes set out in this plan are aligned with our medium-term financial strategy and will ensure ever more that our approaches to budget setting and strategic prioritisation will be intrinsically linked going forward. And that's particularly important thinking about some of the answers to the questions that Philip just gave around recognising the scale of some of the pressures, many of them external and almost existential, that the city and the council are facing over the coming period. It's a further demonstration of our development as an organisation, responding to the recommendations set out in the LGA Peer Challenge in 2022, where the Peer Challenge team were absolutely crystal clear that an organisation of the size and complexity of Sheffield City Council must have a medium-term plan which connects high-level ambitions with key strategies, directorate plans, and through to the contributions that every single member of staff make to communities in the city every day. Since December, we have also seen the publication and endorsement by this committee of our Sheffield City Goals, which we've integrated into the updated version of the council plan. The city goals sit atop the council plan. They're a collective statement of ambition and vision for the city's future over the next decade or so by communities and partners in Sheffield. Everyone in the city has a role to play, and the council plan specifically sets out the things that we as Sheffield City Council will do over the next 4 years to make a significant contribution to the achievement of Sheffield's goals. So what does the plan say? It's built around 3 critical policy drivers and 5 strategic outcomes, which will help us to build the organisation that this amazing city deserves. And they'll focus our whole organisation, firstly, on putting people at the heart of what we do and enabling the brilliant people of this city and our council to achieve their potential. Secondly, taking the long-term decisions that are needed to drive the city's long-term and sustainable prosperity. And thirdly, protecting and respecting the city's environment and ecology to create a sustainable future. Our policy drivers and outcomes will run through everything, becoming the focus of our budgets, performance framework and plans, and ensuring that we can demonstrate to citizens and partners that we're delivering the priorities that matter to them. We have been out to consultation on the draft plan, and I'm going to hand over to Laurie to just talk a bit more about what we heard from the many people who shared their views, for whom we are very grateful.
Thank you. So this committee in December agreed a draft version of the council plan, and look, we launched a consultation alongside the budget conversation, so it was part of the same content that Philip has just presented on the budget report. We listened to feedback on the plan from nearly around 270 people in the city, and that included citizens, partners, members of our staff and members of the council as well, who provided a range of comments, and we particularly focused on trying to make sure that it gave people space to comment at length about what we'd set out. I'd like to thank everybody on behalf of the council as well for contributing to that exercise. It was a very useful exercise to understand what people thought about our ambitions and gave us the opportunity to reflect a little bit more on what we've set out. There's a summary of the specific changes we've made in the paper, so if you look in section 3 of the cover paper that sets out in more detail, there's also an appendix 2 which provides a more detailed overview of the consultation response. What did citizens tell us? Well, 3 big messages came out of there. There was significant support for the proposed policy drivers and strategic outcomes in the plan, and a recognition of the level of ambition we're setting out as an organisation, which now aligns directly to our city goals. Citizens also wanted to understand better the relationship between the policy drivers we set out. So the people, prosperity and planet drivers need to be viewed as one. So they're a triple lock in some ways. So one can't be achieved without pursuing the other 2. I mean, we see that as a fundamental part of the ambition we've got for the future of the city. And finally, while citizens recognise the scale of ambition in the plan, people wanted to know more about what we're going to do to deliver. And that ties directly into the budget report you've just heard and the work we're going to do over the coming years on moving to an outcome-based budget, but also the key strategies we're developing as a council and our Directorate plans. So we'll be able to set out in more concrete detail how we're going to achieve the outcomes and priorities.
Thanks, Laurie. So, I mean, just to sum up, this plan is deliberately and unashamedly ambitious because that's what the city needs, and that's what I think we all feel our organisation needs. And we also know that the challenges we're facing as a city and an organisation, as manifest through the discussion we just had on the budget, are not going to be responded to if we're not ambitious. It involves and has absolutely driven all the way through it a relentless commitment to quality and consistency of experience for citizens when they connect with the council. So it really places great service delivery as a foundation to our ambitions and recognises that we are on a journey to get to that place, and we won't relent until we have got there. The plan's a very clear statement that we need to work as one council. This is a common reflection from members, from citizens and from our staff. And it's what our staff want, to be able to be part of one team, working together, feeling empowered, feeling that they can bring the passion and the skill and their commitment to the city together to get things done. And as has been demonstrated through the consultation, it's really positive that many people who responded to, the majority of people I think who responded to the consultation were really supportive of the clear outcomes that we can all stand behind, that cut across the council, and that sense of shared purpose. So that strategies, including in fact strategies that we'll talk about later on the agenda today, can flow through with that golden thread back to the council plan. So there are 3 recommendations, and I will happy to take questions, comments or reflections from members. Thank you.
Thank you very much both for the presentation today. I've seen Councillor Angenzio and Councillor Belbin who would like to comment on this. Is there anyone else who would like to come in, just so I know? No? Councillor Angenzio first. Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you for all the work that's gone into this, because it's been a really it's a journey, isn't it, that the whole organisation has been on in the last however many months, years, and it's really testament to how much the culture is changing in the council, which is what we're trying to achieve, and how much cooperative work there is and partnership work. I was at an event yesterday for all services in adult and social care with partners, and the theme was collaboration and partnership, and that's happening at all levels in the city, and it's really good to see things coming together after all the work. I mean, this doesn't mean that the job is finished, this is just the beginning. I think just a comment from the briefing I had this morning, I think it would be good to have I'm not going to say an idiot guide too, but I'm going to say a succinct kind of one-page things of how the different strategies and things work together and flow, because we're doing so much work on so many strategies at the moment, and I think members would like to have, and even if we put it on the website, at the beginning, it's just because there's so much going on, so much work, and people don't realise how much is going on and how many conversations we're having with partners and internally. So thank you very much for the work.
Thank you very much. Councillor Belbin.
Thanks, and again, thank you for all the work that's gone into this. That I think has been incredibly valuable. I think there's been real value in doing this work alongside the City Goals work as well. I know you say you've been out to consultation, but I think because we did all that work around the City Goals that really engaged with citizens, that has already informed the plan through those people being involved in the City Goals work, and it's been really, it's really clear that this has been formed alongside and fits really well and is the council's contribution towards achieving those goals. And it means that while the plan is clearly focused on the next 4 years, you can see that it's part of that longer journey about further future ambitions for the city and for the next generation. I think, you talked about how it's a cross-cutting plan, and I think, again, that's really important. I suppose I'm conscious, and there is lots of fantastic partnership working going on. I'm conscious as well that, we still need to ensure that we are properly joined up across those committees. I know Councillor Dale and I have had a conversation this morning trying to unpick a situation that has ended up falling across 2 committees, and that ends up having budgetary implications and repercussions as well. So I think, I know we're doing all the work with Future Sheffield that underpins this as well. And that's more about our systems and processes and culture.
but I think there's still a bit of a question for me around that budget process and how we align the budget process successfully around this plan so that we don't end up in those committee-based silos around budget questions. So if you could just respond to that, but thanks again. I think it's really a great piece of work.
Thank you very much. I completely endorse those comments about the need to not be siloed and to align the council plan and the budget as we go forward around the strategic outcomes set out in the plan. Councillor Williams wants to comment, and then I'll come back to yourselves, Kate and Laurie.
Thank you, Chair. And I think Councillor Genzio's idea of an idiot's guide would be welcome on this side of the table for me. No, it's an incredibly ambitious project, and I know there's an incredible amount of work that's gone into it. My one concern, and I don't want to be negative, is I can't see any national government increasing funding for, I mean, from what we've heard from whichever colour the government is next time, there's not going to be a flood of money. And how robust do you feel your plans are, given the ongoing potential budget constraints we're going to have? Thank you.
Thank you all. So just taking those comments in order, Councillor Argencio, I don't think that an idiot's guide is certainly the wrong language. Many colleagues in my team know that I have been asking for exactly what you asked for quite some time, and we have done some work around mapping all of our strategies. What the council plan structure allows us to do is to do that work in a focused way. So I'm very happy to commit that we'll come back with some sort of visual that enables all members to understand how the different strategic products, delivery plans, service plans nest underneath the council plan. That's a really important part of how we operationalise this and avoid this just being a sort of ambitious vision that sits on a shelf as opposed to something that truly drives the work and transformation of the organisation. In terms of the points around budget alignment that Councillor Belbin mentioned, I think, again, that's another really important piece of next work to do. It's not straightforward. Public organisations, you know, at local, regional, national level have been working for decades on how you balance what are, you know, clear financial constraints and planning assumptions around and governance on, you know, cross-cutting outcomes and issues. But we are really determined as a team to support members to do that, and I think we need to probably flag that there'll clearly be an interaction with Governance Committee, I think, as we work through the next year or so, and with the processes around how the budget is developed in future years, if we are serious about wanting to align our budget decisions to the outcomes that matter most. Which segues, I think, Councillor Williams, exactly into your point. I think it's really important to say that we haven't supported members to draft this ambitious plan with some assumption that a white knight's going to turn around the corner at some point in the next few years from national government and find a magic amount of money. We're working on the assumption that things continue to be very challenging. That's embedded in our medium-term financial strategy. We also know there are lots of areas of the council where we are not accessing the full potential of the level of investment that we could be, whether that's private sector investment, whether that's public investment. You'll hear later a conversation around heritage. These are areas where we know we haven't put our best foot forward historically in terms of attracting the level of investment that this city deserves, and what this council plan does is make it easier for us to maximise and attract investment where we need it. I think it also is, though, to be blunt, going to help us make and support members to make harder decisions around the things that matter most, and making sure that we're thinking holistically about the priorities for the council and the city, and also investing in improvement work that will enable us to get into a more sustainable position. So I could talk forever about the joys of planning, but I think there's enough evidence, literature, and experience from around the world, and from many other councils that we can learn from, that the first step to getting where we need to and managing within our budget is being really clear about what matters, and that's what this plan does.
Thank you very much indeed. So, The recommendations for us to consider are that we enthusiastically note and thank citizens, employees and partners and staff for comments and insights provided on the draft council plan as part of the council plan and budget conversation. Note that the updates and amendments that Laurie referred to have been made in line with the feedback that was provided, and that we consider the proposed council plan as set out in the appendix and recommend it to full council for the meeting on 6th of March 2024. So this would go forward to be considered alongside the budget as was intended throughout. Are colleagues happy to support those recommendations? Thank you. That's a big step forward. Okay, item number 11 is the delivery of the city's heritage strategy. And before I hand over to Rebecca, I would just like to say I'm really pleased that we're taking this forward today. Heritage is everything that we inherit from our past that we want to protect and celebrate today so that we can pass it on to future generations. And Sheffield's heritage is inclusive, it's diverse, and it tells the story of who we are today. And I think you'll see in this that it is not just about looking backwards, it is very much about looking forward. So with that opening comment, let me hand over to Rebecca. If you could just introduce yourself and then give us a brief summary of the report. Thank you very much. It's better than last month when it started screaming out.
Too good, that's better. Right, apologies everybody. So, great to be here. My name's Rebecca Maddox, and my role is to support particularly arts and culture within the City Council, but with a bit of heritage thrown in. So, the report that you have today is based on a recommendation which full council made in February last year, that heritage should be added to the work programme of this committee, and therefore we've produced this report and also a work plan in response to that. It's worth saying that Robin Hughes, who's one of the members of the Sheffield Heritage Partnership Board, was hoping to be here today as well to co-present the report. He's unfortunately poorly, but he has sent a statement which, if you're happy, I'll read out as part of my presentation. Thank you. So there are three parts to this report. Full council, as we say, was really keen to support heritage and all that heritage can do for the city and its citizens, but didn't actually have the sort of legal capacity to adopt the Joined Up Heritage Sheffield strategy on behalf of the council. So this is an opportunity for this committee to do that. It's worth saying that the Joined Up Heritage Sheffield strategy was put together through a kind of grassroots group of heritage organisations in the city over a 2-year period, supported by the University of Sheffield. And it talks about all the different kinds of heritage that there are. In particular, there's a lot of focus at the moment on something that's called intangible heritage, and that is to do with customs and different ways of living that people have, and which kind of counterbalances the idea that heritage is just about old buildings. Old buildings are really important, but there's so much more than that, and it's very much about reflecting all the cultures and histories of our city for the future as well. So based on, again, the Joined Up Heritage Strategy is for the whole city, so some of the sort of focuses within it, it's not that the City Council has to do everything, but obviously as the local authority there's a lot that we can do to support the development and the implementation of the strategy. We've created a work plan based on the Joined Up Heritage Strategy, and this has been created by council officers and members of the Heritage Partnership Board together. And as part of that short document, There are things that the City Council can do as part of our business as usual in order to really embed heritage in all the different things that we do. But there are also extra things which we would really love to do, which would move the strategy forward much more quickly. So there is a recommendation, not that this committee agrees to find funding for a heritage officer, but we would like your steer and support for doing that piece of work and seeing if there are ways which, in a kind of sustainable way, we can support a heritage officer who would have a specific role in moving this area of work forward. As I say, it's not that we can't do anything with our current resources, but I think a bit of a theme coming through this meeting today has been that we do operate a very lean ship, actually, and to give things the real emphasis and sort of impetus that they need. Ideally, we need additional resources to do that. There are options to find external funding to help make that happen as well. So I just want to switch over to the statement that Robin Hughes from the Heritage Partnership Board has put together. 1 year ago, a meeting of the full council passed a resolution supporting the heritage strategy published by Joined Up Heritage Sheffield. It recognised the social, environmental, educational and well-being benefits and economic potential of Sheffield's diverse heritage and made a commitment to work with the Heritage Partnership Board set up by Joined Up Heritage Sheffield and play its part in implementing that strategy. Today, we hope that this committee will turn that support into action. Officers have worked enthusiastically with stakeholders to create their report and to make its objectives realistic but nonetheless ambitious. Planning have already acted energetically to live up to an objective already laid out in the draft local plan, for Sheffield to have a reputation for valuing its heritage assets. They have formalised and funded the popular local heritage list, found sustainable ways to improve conservation support, and won government funding to document in detail the historic value of Sheffield's many and much valued conservation areas. To give last year's decision and today's resolution full force, that energy must be explicit in every plan and strategy of the council, recognising the impact on heritage of the council's work. But heritage must and will earn its keep. The question is not just what the council can do for heritage, but what benefits heritage can bring to the council's work. Heritage already threads its way, sometimes invisibly, through all the work of the council. The council plan for 2024 to 28 is driven by people, prosperity and planet. Heritage matters because people matter. Knowing our heritage gives us our sense of identity and belonging. Our valued stories and traditions connect us within and between our communities, anchor us in the places that we call home, and underpin our well-being. As for prosperity, the heritage sector contributed a massive 36.6 billion GVA and over 500,000 jobs to the English economy in 2019 and supports further jobs and value through the visitor economy. Heritage is a critical component of at least 6 of the plan's policy priorities in action, from the Graves building to Attercliffe Waterside. The planet benefits when we reuse a building, but green heritage can be fragile, so fighting climate catastrophe is also a fight for our heritage. Heritage also works hand in glove with the new city goals across all 6 of its stories. Areas with a high density of heritage assets attract the creative and knowledge businesses that make a creative and entrepreneurial city. Green Sheffield can learn its retrofitting skills from historic buildings, skills that are guaranteed a market. And green places are some of our most treasured heritage assets. The vital role of heritage in well-being and mental health will make us resilient. Understanding and celebrating our heritages, both tangible and intangible, and having the power to protect it, enables thriving communities to build bridges. The connected city of the goals needs both functional infrastructure and a shared sense of place and community. Heritage connects us. Its loss disrupts us like a cancelled bus service. Caring for our fellow citizens in all their glorious diversity means helping to preserve and promote their many worlds of heritage, and knowing that our identities are recognised and respected will help us to believe in a safer Sheffield. Heritage is for all generations because it is intergenerational by nature. It is whatever we inherit from the past that we value enough to preserve for the future. Embedding heritage in all aspects of the council's work starts with communication. Within the council, everyone must understand how they can play their part. Everyone has to know that this new focus can make the valuable work they do more effective. Everyone has to feel fully supported to bring heritage into their thinking and put it explicitly into their plans. The public must hear too, and the news story in advance of this meeting being an excellent start. They also have to believe it, so there must be real change, which must be made as visible as possible. Whatever is visible and credible to the public is visible and credible to potential funders and partners, to investors and businesses, to new residents and visitors. Heritage is much more than who we were in the past. It defines who we will be in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, and thank you to Robin, who I hope is watching, for that wonderful statement. Really, really powerful words, and I think we all would like to send best wishes to Robin for a speedy recovery. But I'd like to pay my own particular tribute to Robin for his work through Joined Up Heritage Sheffield to really drive forward the heritage agenda in this city. That statement reflected Robin's typical informed and wide-ranging advice, support, friendly challenge and encouragement, and it's a pleasure to work with Joined Up Heritage to take this work forward. I've seen 4 members who would like to come in, 5 members who'd like to come in. So if people could keep their comments relatively brief. 6. It's like an auction house. 7. Okay, we're going to take. Yes, let's keep our comments as brief as we can. So in the order that people have indicated to me, Councillor Naz, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Argentio, and then we'll come round for a second round.
Thank you for the presentation, Rebecca. I welcome this strategy because it's unique in being a community-led strategy created from the ground up by grassroots organisations, and I thought that's a really good way of doing a strategy. It was well written, easy to read, and I particularly like all the action plans for each theme. I think that's really useful. We all have a responsibility to promote a good understanding of what Sheffield's heritage is and the benefits, whether it's economic, social, cultural, environmental. We have to bring together and connect individuals, voluntary groups and professionals in collective effort to maintain and enhance Sheffield's heritage. I felt really proud reading the strategy. I really felt a sense of belonging, and I think that's really, really important. We are a proud city of sanctuary. We do have 179 languages spoken. I am looking forward to learning more about our diverse heritage and the links particularly to the Sheffield steel industry from many nationalities. And this is really personal for me to enhance a sense of belonging. The history of many people who came from the subcontinent to work in our steel heritage and how they shaped Sheffield, not just yesterday, but today. Unfortunately, we live in times where there's a divide, and many young people, maybe second, third generation children of immigrants, don't have that sense of belonging. But actually having conversations around our shared history, because we all have a shared history in Sheffield, promotes community cohesion. It will promote a sense of belonging, particularly for our young people. So I'm really looking forward to that work, particularly around our diverse heritage. But honestly, well done. I really, really like the strategy, and I think it can really work.
Thank you, Councillor Naz. I ought to just point out really clearly that the strategy was put together by the heritage organisations with the University of Sheffield. And obviously it's really important that we endorse it, but we need to make sure it's their strategy and that your thanks go to them.
Thank you very much. Councillor Johnson, then Councillor Argentio.
Thanks. Okay. I was just going to say it's a real pleasure actually that we get to discuss this strategy today. partly because of what you said. It's a strategy that's been prepared by people who really care and know about this sort of topic and presented to us. So we should be very lucky as a council to do that. But I was just thinking it's actually a lovely blend of people, prosperity and planet, and that's what brings this all together. So, thanks to those guys out there. I mean, in terms of people, I was just thinking about the number of people who were really interested in, the city's history. So there's the people who were involved in drawing this strategy together, who are the active people. You've mentioned Robbie News there, so I think we can all wish him well. But also, of course, two of the people who were very heavily involved in drawing this strategy have subsequently been elected as councillors. So we've got Councillor Holmshaw and Councillor Riddler. It's a pity they're not here today, but it's kind of good to get people who actually get elected with a ready-made strategy that kind of proves that they've done their work there. But the number of people who are involved in local history in Sheffield is actually phenomenal, as you see with the Heritage Open Days. And then on prosperity, I mean, it's such a relief now to get it recognised that that there is something in the heritage value that leads to economic development. It's really important. It's kind of been denied for years. And remember, it's only a few years ago we had a cabinet member with responsibility describing heritage as putting the brakes on development. So I'm really glad that we've done that complete turnabout to recognise heritage for what it is now. And then finally on the planet, you all know the saying of the greenest building is the building that's already there, and that's a fantastic reason to put some value into the buildings that we've got that aren't going to be Buckingham Palace, but there's so much of the unique stuff that Councillor Naz was talking about, and if we can reuse those, make it into the future, that's really good. But of course, it's not just the buildings. The final point is, of course, it's not just the buildings, as Councillor Naz again said. It's so much to do with the people, the community, and this is where we link the past with the future. And I was just thinking about in the days that people in Sheffield actually took direct action against those businesses that they found out were supplying the slave trade, and there was some really interesting stories there about how people in Sheffield just thought that was wrong. And a bit like with the cotton mill strikes on the west of the country, people in Sheffield, once they found out that steel products were being used to enslave people, took action against that. And actually part of our heritage, a really strong part of heritage in South Yorkshire, is about that level of political activism, so I think that's really important. I think that will probably feature in the next item too, when we just reflect on the heritage that's being shown now with, the level of anxiety that people show about world affairs. It's not just a Sheffield thing, it's a Sheffield's place in the world.
Thank you very much, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Agency, and for everyone coming up, if I could ask people to keep their comments fairly brief. Thank you.
I'll be briefer than Douglas. I want to echo some of the things that Councillor Naz has said. I think you said it at the beginning, Rebecca, that heritage is about, it's not just about the past, it's about the future, but obviously we need to know the past to find our place, find a sense of belonging. And I think this is a really good opportunity for all our diverse community to see themselves reflected in our heritage, because heritage changes. We're a city of sanctuary. We're constantly welcoming people to the city due to world events and, people seeking asylum in this country. The population of Sheffield is going to change, rapidly, probably over the next 20, 30, 40 years. But also, can I say that when, in the last year and a half, when I've kind of looked at heritage and started having conversation about health and heritage, I am not a second or third generation Italian in Sheffield. I'm the first person of my family in Sheffield. But I've become really curious about the Italians that came to Sheffield to work in the steel industry, but also came to the country to work in agriculture. So I've started researching myself that kind of connection with Sheffield of my roots, my Italian roots. So it's inspired me. So hopefully it will inspire other people from, generations that have been in the city to find that connection. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to suggest we perhaps just keep the conversation going and take some more questions before coming back to you, or comments before coming to you, Rebecca. So I've got, in this order, Councillor Williams, Councillor Hurst, Councillor Dale, and then, so take those three. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your report, and thanks to Robin Hughes for his letter. He's absolutely hit the nail on the head, debunking one of the key issues, which is, in times of austerity, we can't afford heritage. Clearly we can. It earns a lot of money for the city. That's important. I agree with everything that's been said, but I'm conscious of being brief. I think the key thing for me is that heritage can pull communities together. I attended the AGM of the Friends of Loxley Valley last night, and you may or may not be aware of this. The Loxley Valley and the Riverland Valley are full of heritage about the steel industry in Sheffield. Specialists, but there are some magnificent examples of technology of a bygone era, and it's that type of thing which I think is fantastic. Heritage is everywhere in Sheffield, and so I fully endorse and support this strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Williams. Councillor Hurst.
Thank you, Tom. And can I echo your best wishes to Robin, and thank Rebecca for bringing this here, and also reading that letter out, which was, it's very rare that we get to hear such a passionate yet lucid and coherent argument for a document in any council meeting. My question really, to be brief, is we're accepting this and adopting this strategy today. How do we then all go on to embed it in the outcomes and aims of the city plan, the city strategy, all the actions of our committee? Because I think we're pushing it an open door. We acknowledge and we accept the benefits that heritage can give to us and how it can enrich us. So how do we embed it? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dale.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the strategy. I'm in support of it. I represent a ward where we have a wealth of history. We've got Winkerbank Chapel, which was home to Mary Ann Rawson. She lived there and she was an ardent campaigner for improving the conditions for the poor and also humanitarian causes such as the abolition of slavery. And on the back of this, I would like to thank all of the volunteers from Winkerbank Chapel who actually keep that history alive within the community and across the city. But we also have the very famous Winkerbank Hill Fort, which was home to the Brigantes Nation. And again, we have the Friends of Winkerbank Hill. And supporting what Councillor Williams said, you know, the Winkerbank Hill Fort and the Friends of Winkerbank Hill and Winkerbank Chapel bring our community together every year through different events, sharing that information, working with children and older people. It's just fantastic to see. And this strategy, I would hope, will help to be able to support that and grow it. So I'm really in support of this strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dale. Councillor Levery.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as a councillor from the north of the city where we have two conservation areas in Ecclesfield and Grenoside, this is really important for us. We are losing some of our buildings of townscape merit. They're actually collapsing because they can no longer be sustained. The primary school, which was replaced 15 years ago, the infant school actually fell down this year. So we're losing our heritage, and it is so important that we have a strategy that can deal with this. And of course, the sale of these sites still hasn't been sorted out, so we've lost yet another building of townscape merit. We have a pub called Norfolk Arms in Grenoside, which has been empty now for 5 years. Again, part of the fabric of the village, with no sign of that getting resolved soon. So heritage in terms of physical assets is really important to us. And just as a note of historical interest, but the first smelting of iron ore in this city took place in Grenoside in 1615 with coal and iron ore dug from the woods in Grenoside. So we have a long history and we should be doing our best to preserve it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. And it was very good to see in the news today that 2 projects in Sheffield have been awarded funding from Historic England to celebrate working class heritage in the city. And I'll just briefly say what they are, because I'm sure you'll be interested. Project, which is entitled Of Pigeons and Peas, will tell the history of manor workers' gardens. The manor estate, built in the 1930s, was one of the first in the city to include gardens and allotments, and many pigeon fanciers lived there. And then there's also a project which will be telling the story of 56 Burngreave Road, which collectively will tell the story of 3 different Caribbean families who consecutively lived at that address. So on the day that we're about to hopefully adopt this new heritage strategy, I think that is a very good note to welcome, and hopefully there is more heritage funding to come into the city. Rebecca, there's back to you.
Yeah, so just very briefly, thank you to everybody for your support, and the kind of the levels of understanding within the committee are just, brilliant to hear. There was a specific question from Diane about, how do we work out what the council has to do about this? So on page 507 in your pack, we've got a work plan, and that picks out some of the specific things that different council departments can be doing alongside partners to move the strategy forward. So that's our little blueprint. I think there's also, you'll want to keep having updates to make sure that we're moving forward and making progress on this as well.
Thank you ever so much. I think you've been unanimously welcomed in people's comments so far. So we've got a number of recommendations: that we adopt the heritage strategy as appended, which was developed by Joined Up Heritage Sheffield, that we note the good progress already being made in embedding heritage into the council's policy and activity, that we endorse the initial heritage strategy action plan, actions identified, that we support the exploration of ways to create and sustain a Sheffield City Council Heritage Officer post to help continue this work, and that we note that implementation of the action plan will be monitored over the next 12 months and future reports brought to this committee. Are people happy to support those recommendations? Thank you very much. Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, item number 12 is an update on the City Council's actions relating to the ongoing conflict in Israel and Palestine, which we began the meeting with some questions around. And I think I'll hand over to James in a minute. But look, before we start, it's really important that we acknowledge the deep concern that very many people in this city have about the loss of innocent life and suffering in Israel and Gaza over recent months. We've all watched the heartbreaking scenes of devastation and tragedy, and I repeat my earlier point that I hope Parliament will vote for an immediate ceasefire, and that the UK government does all it can to apply pressure for an immediate ceasefire. Many people in Sheffield have taken part in protests and campaigns about the conflict, and many more have been involved in fundraising and other humanitarian activity to support victims. And over the last few months, no doubt we have all been involved in conversations with residents about those concerns and heard them. Listening to those concerns is essential, and those conversations have informed the report that is before us today. And as leaders of this council, it's incumbent on us all to work to bring people together, to work together, to listen, and to work for peace in all of our communities as the proud city of sanctuary that we are. James, I'll hand over to you. If you could introduce yourself for people watching online and at home, and then just give us a brief summary of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm James Henderson. I'm Director of Policy and Democratic Engagement. So this report asks the committee to consider a number of issues relating to the Council's response to the ongoing conflict in Gaza, and in particular to respond to the resolution passed by full Council on the 1st of November 2023, which called for the Strategy and Resources Committee to consider whether the Council should join the Sheffield Coalition Against Israeli Apartheid. I will come on to that point in a moment, but the report does a number of other things. It asks the committee to know, as Councillor Hunt has just mentioned, the concerns of very many people across Sheffield about the loss of life that we have seen since the 7th of October 2023 in Israel and in Palestine, to note the actions that so many people in the city have taken to protest about the ongoing conflict, and to recognise the efforts that Sheffield people have taken to raise funds for the humanitarian response to the conflict. It also asks the committee to note the outcome of a review that has been conducted into the council's supply chain to ascertain whether there are any companies that the council does business with that are named as part of the United Nations Human Rights Council as enabling or supporting the construction or maintenance of illegal settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories. The outcome of that review is that none of those companies named in the Human Rights Council's report form part of the Sheffield City Council's visible supply chain. Finally, it asks the committee to note the resolution of full council in September 2019 that Palestine is recognised by the City Council as a full, independent and sovereign state, and that continues to be the Council's position. That resolution also noted the importance of a genuine two-state solution to the resolution of the Israel-Palestine conflict, and that recognition of Palestine as a full state under international law was a necessary step towards this. In relation to the resolution of full council in December requesting the committee to consider whether the council should join the Sheffield coalition, the paper sets out three questions that would need to be answered positively for this to be something that the council could do. Firstly, is it possible for the council to join a membership organisation such as the coalition? Secondly, if so, are the aims of the coalition ones that the council may lawfully support? And then thirdly, if so, are the aims of the coalition ones which the council wishes to support? The paper concludes that the answer to the first of these is yes, and the second, whether the aims are ones that the council may lawfully support, is no. To explain why this is the case, the aims of the coalition include for Sheffield City Council to declare Israel to be an apartheid state, and for Sheffield City Council to draw up a statement of action similar to the one that the council developed in relation to South Africa in 1981. The elements of that statement, which have been published by the coalition on the internet, are set out in full in the paper before the committee at paragraph 2.4 on pages 522 to 523 of your pack, and include a number of points in relation to the procurement of goods from Israel and investment in companies that have Israeli interests, as well as promoting public understanding of the situation in Israel. If the council were to join the coalition, the paper concludes that a legitimate expectation would arise that the coalition's aims were ones that the council would take steps to action, and in particular would give rise to an expectation that those aims would guide how we would act when procuring goods or services. This would be contrary to the 1988 Local Government Act, which was passed into law after the council's actions in respect to South Africa, which expressly forbids local authorities from considering the country or territory of origin of supplies to, or the location in any country or territory of the business activities or interests of contractors when making procurement decisions. The paper also notes that aspects of the statement of action are likely to be unlawful or in breach of statutory guidance regarding use of council resources to publish information that could be perceived to be a political statement or is intended to influence or persuade the public to hold a particular opinion. Furthermore, the paper notes a bill currently before Parliament which would further restrict local authorities from considering foreign state conduct in its decision-making. It's important to note that the advice of the committee is that the aims of the coalition are not ones that the council may lawfully support with the law as it stands, regardless of whether or not the new bill achieves royal assent. Because it is considered that the aims of the coalition are not ones that the council may lawfully support, then it's not possible for the council to consider joining the coalition. And the first recommendation is to ask the committee to note that position. The other recommendations in the report relate to the points that I made earlier in my presentation regarding the Council's continuing recognition of Palestine as an independent state, to note the actions of many people in Sheffield who have protested about the ongoing conflict and the humanitarian response seen in the city, and to note the outcome of the review of our supply chain in relation to companies that have been identified by the UN Human Rights Council as being active in the occupied territories. I will leave my remarks there, but I'm very happy to take any questions that the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James, for the presentation and for your work to prepare the report. I've got two members who've indicated so far, three members. Councillor Otten, Councillor Johnson and Councillor Feldman.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, James, for bringing this to us. Before I start my main comments, I'd just like to welcome some of the answers you gave earlier in the meeting regarding the ICJ. I think the ICJ decision is something we should all welcome and certainly endorse in full, including the demand for the immediate release of hostages, because that wasn't mentioned earlier. And I, again, actually, I welcome specifically the diligence with regard to the settlements in the illegal settlements in the occupied territories, because it's assuring to have that piece of diligence done. However, I am concerned about the request that has come into us. It is not entirely clear what it is asking for, and there is every chance that it may be something that is kind of so morally repugnant that it does not do it justice simply to say, well, legally we can't, and therefore we have nothing to say. There are three things that I would look at in particular. The pledge of the Sheffield Coalition Against Israel says that we endorse the Palestinian cause, and it's not clear what that means. Is it the cause for a state, which I would support, or is it the cause of the destruction of Israel, which I would be against? It doesn't say we support peacefully this cause, because currently there is a war going on, and there's a danger that if there's a war going on and you say we support a particular cause, you're asking us to endorse a military action that includes terrorist actions against civilians, and breaches of humanitarian law in terms of the use of human shields and fighting in civilian clothes. That is not something, if we were asked to endorse that, which is possibly what we've been asked to do, it is not enough to say we can't legally endorse that. We should say, how can you possibly ask us to endorse that? It is such an evil thing to do. The second thing I'd look at, in terms of the demands of the coalition, is that the sanctions against Israel and so on, until all the demands are met, and it's exactly which demands these are, but including the right of return. Understood in full, the right of return that is demanded means the return of millions of Palestinians to within Israel proper. Now, that is not a reasonable demand. That is a spoiler demand that serves to be an obstacle to any peace agreement. It is a little bit like asking the UK to admit, say, 10 million people who have all been raised and taught at schools that it is good to murder people of Christian heritage, and which includes tens of thousands of people who are part of a military organisation set up to pursue that goal. Now, you may think that is worth doing, and that the murder of millions of people will be a legitimate outcome, but that in asking for that, you should spell it out. Third point. Third point.
Third and final point, Joe?
Yes, final point on the coalition, and it endorses specifically the BDS movement. The BDS movement, the problem I have with the BDS movement, I think most clearly, is that it rejects working with organisations that seek to bring communities together. So in Israel, there is a group called Standing Together, which involves Israelis and Palestinians working together, living together, breaking down the hatred, breaking down the humanisation, and trying to bring out peace. They're within the realm of Israeli politics, but on the extreme kind of peacenik end, you'd probably say. And BDS rejects working with them because we refuse to normalise anything within Israeli society. That is not a peace campaign. That is a war campaign. So for them to come here and say, please, please endorse our campaign, I don't think it's good enough just to say, well, we're not allowed to. How dare you ask us to endorse that? How dare you?
Okay. Look, Joe, what I would say, and we'll take some other comments in a minute, is in order to understand the aims of the coalition, there's been 2 meetings that have taken place between myself and members of the coalition, and much of what you have talked about I think would be a mischaracterisation of what we are being asked to consider endorsing by joining the coalition. What James referred to and what is set out in the report reflects the conversations that we have had. The judgment from colleagues here in our legal and governance teams is that it would not be lawful to join. We are not making any assertions about anything beyond the information that is set out in the report. So I think we can note those comments, and I'm going to bring in some other people. Councillor Johnson.
Well, thank you for that. Some sensible words there, because we've had some useful and constructive meetings with members from the coalition, and Councillor Hunt and I were there. I think the way I would look at this is to say, well, actually, we acknowledge that the coalition has some specific requests, but the overall aims are much looser. It is a coalition rather than a single organisation. And in terms of the way I'd read the report, I have to say my reading of it is that it's not that we actually can't, as a matter of black and white law, join the coalition, but to acknowledge that it would be open us up to some litigation risk, because, of course, the whole context of procurement of the council is a legally complex area. There's some quite tough rules around it. But let's just go back a step, and my point is that full council voted for us in this committee to look at joining the coalition, to consider joining the coalition. And of course, full council by a majority voted for that, obviously with the implication that this was the right thing to do. To be fair, this is Sheffield. We don't have a lot of direct involvement with the supplying the military in Palestine, Israel. It is largely symbolic, but the point is that we have to do something, even if it is symbolic, for just the reasons that so many people have made, that we can't just stand by and do nothing. So I was one of the people at full council who supported the step towards the council formally joining the coalition, and I would still be in favour of that. So I would propose that I'm likely to vote against recommendation 1, which is where we're being advised to reject that. I think we can join the coalition, and that is notwithstanding the risk there. So this means the council taking on some risk of challenge. But going back to the point about that, I mean, there are serious points been made about this council took a very principled stand against apartheid in 1981. And you have to think about the context of that time. Context of that time was, I am sure there were people in Sheffield back in 1981 who weren't very keen on black people in South Africa having the same rights as white people. I'm sure that wasn't unanimous in the way that the city looked at it. There would have been divisions in the city then. The council then took a principled stance. It set out a number of things about how it would use its economic influence to do that. You have to remember this was the time of the Thatcher government, and Thatcher saw Nelson Mandela as a terrorist and the ANC as a terrorist organisation. That was the prevailing view of that government at that time, and subsequently passed law and this refers to the Local Government Act of 1988, passed under the Thatcher government specifically to try and reduce the impact of councils speaking out on international political issues that do affect us, and we know it affects us because the number of demonstrations in the city. So that just goes to indicate why I think we should be joining the coalition, but for this one I'm proposing we vote against recommendation 1. So I'm going to invite anyone else to join me on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Feldman, please.
Thank you. I'm a bit disappointed actually that this paper, which I had hoped would be an opportunity to bring people together about what we all agree about, which is an end to the horrendous situation in Palestine and the impending assault on Rafah, is being used really to pursue personal agendas by Councillor Otten that just seem to be focused on trying to sow division. And Councillor Johnson, I appreciate what you're saying, but I do feel that trying to proposing that we essentially open up the council to risk over what you've acknowledged is really quite a symbolic gesture. It feels quite frustrating to me. What I would like to focus on is the positive recommendations in this paper that I think we've already referred to, but that also speak to the questions that were raised earlier by in the public questions. And that's about reviewing our ethical procurement policy. It's about reaffirming our city's recognition of Palestine as a sovereign state. And we have the proposal as well about Nablus as the next agenda item, and the acknowledgement of the fantastic work that's been done by people in our city for fundraising for humanitarian causes in Palestine. And I think that they are positive things. I do really recognise the frustration that many campaigners feel that the actions of the council can only have such a limited impact on that horrendous situation. But I do think, you know, these symbolic actions are important, and taking them at this level rather than, you know, issues of joining this or that organisation feel important to me, just as it was really important that we voted for an immediate ceasefire back in November. And obviously there is the vote in Parliament tonight. I'm really pleased that the main motion and the Labour amendment do both call for an immediate ceasefire, and I hope that they do prevail over the Tory government's refusal to call for an immediate end for the fighting. But I'd hope that we can take this paper forward and recognise the important things that there are within it that do show the solidarity that we've got across the city for the people of Palestine.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to come in on this conversation? No? Okay. James, I don't know if there was anything you wanted to come back on. I think we've covered some of it, so I don't feel you need to, but you're welcome to.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think there were any specific questions about the paper itself, so I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are recommendations before us. To note, the aims of the Sheffield Coalition Against Israeli Apartheid are ones that Sheffield City Council may not lawfully implement, and therefore to note that the Council cannot join the coalition. To note the concern of many people about the loss of civilian life in Israel and Palestine. To note the actions of many people who've campaigned against the ongoing violence, particularly in Gaza, and who have fundraised to support the victims of the conflict. And to note that there are options available for people to support the humanitarian efforts if they so wish. To note that the Council does not have any contractual relationship with any of the companies named in the UN Human Rights Council as enabling or supporting the construction or continued existence of illegal settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories, and to note that the Council will always procure services in line with its ethical procurement policy. And finally, to note this Council's continued recognition of the State of Palestine as a full, sovereign and independent nation as set out in the resolution of full Council on the 1st of September 2019. Now, dissent has already been indicated from Councillor Johnson. I would just say, if you're seeking to vote against number 1, I would just reiterate the words that you would be voting for something that the Council cannot lawfully implement.
Yeah. So what I wanted to do was wanted to vote against paragraph 1, but vote for paragraphs 2, 3 and 4. And specifically ask that to be noted in the decision.
I understand that. I think I would just ask you to note my comments that in doing so you are saying you do not support, you're saying that this would be, you'd be voting against something that the Council can't lawfully implement. Did you want to come in?
Yeah, I think I've discussed this with Councillor Johnson, and I think it's clear that in voting against, that's not voting for the opposite to be done. So it's not a positive vote to say that we should be joining. It is not recognising that noting.
I think that's, yes, that's my understanding.
In which case, let me take recommendation 1 first. Can I see those who are in favour of recommendation 1? Okay. And can I see those people who are against? No one has indicated any dissent for recommendations 2, 3 and 4. So can I take that we are supportive of recommendations 2, 3 and 4? Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, James. Okay, item number 13 is an update, an international update, and we will be joined by Kate in a moment. I think before we start, I think it's worth restating that we want to ensure that this Sheffield City Council's international relations are on a firm footing, as demonstrated by our passing of the Partner City policy back in November last year. We want to promote this city internationally as a place to invest, visit and live, and we want to strengthen ties with our existing partner cities through mutually beneficial exchanges and initiatives. We all know that international relationships can bring benefits such as the exchange of knowledge, skills, experience, trade and investment opportunities, increasing cultural awareness, tolerance and understanding, and the development of close friendships. But relationships must be committed to and kept up to date, so that it's right that we provide an update on our international relationships, which is what the report does today. Before we begin, I think we just need to probably note that we're going to need to extend the meeting in order to finish item number 13 and 14. So, Kate, for the benefit of people at home and in the room, could you just introduce yourself and then briefly introduce the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Kate Martin. I'm the Exec Director for City Futures. Good morning, everyone. So continuing the international theme, the report that you have in front of you today, agenda item 13, provides an update on our international work during this financial year, 2023 to 2024. The report sets out a range of detail, firstly in Appendix A, setting out the interactions and international activity that we've undertaken during the last financial year. It also then sets out a set of recommendations in relation to our international partnering. And the committee will recall in November 2023 that this committee approved a partnering city policy for helping and supporting us to review and assess the effectiveness of all international partnerships and requests that we might receive in the future from international areas. So this report provides an update on the process undertaken since November, makes recommendations as set out in 1A through to 1J around a range of international partnerships that we currently have, and how we intend to potentially move forward with our international relationships in the future. The committee is also asked to recognise the role and acknowledge the role of the Lord Mayor in continuing to foster the civic arrangements and diplomacy with Sheffield partner cities now and as part of an ongoing work and our civic engagement work. In terms of the recommendations cover a range of options to move forward with our international partnerships. Some recommendations are setting out that our current international relationships maybe have expired with some areas around the world, and we are recommending, as set out, maybe not to continue with some of those relationships or reinstate those relationships in some way. We're also making recommendations to retain some existing relationships, and the details around the reasoning for those retentions are set out in the body of the report and also in the appendix. And we are also identifying a number of areas where we think there is an opportunity for further work and to deepen our global friendship, in particular with Gleadless, and also to carry out more detailed work around our partnerships with South Korea. And the body of the report acknowledges some of the activity to date and some of the history as well. I'd like to put on record thank you for the lead officer who's coordinated part of this review and also the civic, heritage and other democratic teams that have helped collate a significant amount of current and historic information to help us arrive at this point and a deepened understanding of our international partnerships historically and moving forward. In the body of the report, it also acknowledges that we intend to move forward with further work on our international plan, and the decisions that the committee may make today would shape our resourcing and times, efforts and democratic and civic engagements moving forward. I'll pause there.
Thank you very much, Kate, and I'd like to add my thanks to the officers you mentioned for pulling together this work at pace over the last few months. Right, colleagues, can I see who would be interested in coming in to speak on this? I've seen Councillor Agencio first, Councillor Otten, Councillor Naz and Councillor Belbin. Take in those order. Councillor Agencio.
I'll be very brief. I just want to say thank you to the officers involved. It's really good to, again, have some kind of order in the way we do things, because obviously it's, you know, it goes back to the first one in the 1920s. So, you know, things have changed a lot, and obviously situation change. And I'm also really pleased to see Nablus kind of friendship agreement in here, because it's been kind of delayed, you know, because of the pandemic, and, you know, when it was received, which is towards the end of one of the Lord Mayor kind of municipal years, so it was lost in the system, I think, at that point, and then we had the pandemic, so it's really good that it's coming together, and hopefully we can be more proactive as well. And I just want to say that it's really important also to remember that the twinnings, the agreements with international other places in the world, is that we have to see it as a mutual thing. It's not just about Sheffield, it's about what we can give as well as what we can, you know, learn and receive from other places. So thank you for rationalising it. It's really good.
Thank you very much. Councillor Otten.
Thank you very much for this. I had a couple of concerns with this, and they've largely been assuaged. I did have a concern over the friendship agreement with Nablus. I've asked for the text of it, and I'm actually quite happy with it. I'll just read out the objectives. The objectives are encouraging the development of cultural and education exchange between our citizens, and to contribute to a global society where the human rights of all are respected. And I think those are objectives I think we could endorse in friendships agreement with, frankly, anybody in the world who wants to be our friend. I do note in the equality impact assessment that there may be some merit in seeking also a friendship agreement with an Israeli city on the same terms. And I think there would be some merit in doing that. There are, you know, obviously there are cities in Israel that are predominantly Jewish and those that are predominantly Muslim or other minorities, but there are also places that are highly integrated culturally between the different communities, and they may be great examples of you know, the kind of peace that can be built between the communities in the region. So I had some concerns about that. They've been assuaged by being given that text and having the chance to see it. The other thing I'm concerned about is the treatment of China. And I'm conscious that we've had petitions come to us regarding China following the genocide of the Rohingyas and the treatment of Hong Kong, and obviously there are concerns over belligerence towards Taiwan. And I think it's very difficult because we have a Chinese community in our city who is welcome here and contribute to the life of this city, and I wouldn't want them to feel unwelcome. And I think there's great value in maintaining cultural relations with powers that are geopolitical rivals, effectively. And I'm conscious that we have on our list Donetsk, and that was something agreed when Donetsk was part of the Soviet Union, which geopolitically was a much more serious and dangerous rival than China is to us today. So, it's important that we understand the spirit in which maintaining relations with China is to be done, and it's not to detract from our concerns about the Rohingyas, about Hong Kong and Taiwan. So as long as that's clear, I'm happy to endorse the proposal that we have in front of us. But I do think it's something that we have to understand
Thanks, Joe. We'll take some more comments and then come back to that. Councillor Naz and then Councillor Belbin.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I welcome this request and I'm proud to extend our friendship with Nablus in Palestine. I visited Nablus a few years ago alongside the Labour Friends of Palestine. Nablus is a beautiful city with rich history and talent. We were given a tremendous welcome by all individuals and organisations. We met at the Ministry of Education, the City Council, Al-Askar refugee camp, Kurtuba School and Dar al-Funun Arts Centre, were absolutely brilliant with us. Nablus hopes for educational and cultural exchanges, especially for youth with the universities, Al-Najjar University and maybe Sheffield universities. I absolutely welcome this. I would also like to thank Julie Payne and all her colleagues for persisting with this request and bringing this to the council. It took 5 years. This should never happen again. I understand it got lost in the system, the pandemic happened, but that is a very, very long time, and Julie Payne has had to come lots of times to full council to ask the question and to keep reminding us of this. In the report somewhere says that requests should no longer take more than 3 months. I hope that does happen. Just a question that I've got is, could I ask that we have a commitment from the council and officers to continue to deliver cultural events such as Palfest in the city to promote awareness and understanding?
Thank you, Councillor Naz. And I think it's worth saying that the Partner City policy that gives us now a sound decision-making framework through which any new request can be considered in a timely manner. So it would not be possible for a delay of that kind, I believe, to now happen. Councillor Belbin.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Hunt, for stealing my point. But yes, very much so. I think it's really incredibly helpful to have this framework, and I think it does respond to many of the concerns you raised there, Councillor Rotten. But I think it's great to have a framework that we can apply that, if you like, rises above some of the political considerations and actually puts things into a context where we can take measured decisions that are not on the basis simply of it's this country who we disagree with or that country, but really look at the relationships and potential relationships between Sheffield and international partners. So I think it's a really good piece of work, and thanks to Nick for carrying out. Just a quick point to follow on from Councillor Naz's there. I wonder that, seeing as it's clearly not going to be possible to have visitors from Nablus in forthcoming times, if we could consider perhaps around events like Palfest that we invite the Palestinian ambassador instead to make it clear, to make something of this friendship and perhaps, as I say, associated with Palfest as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Belwyn. I think I'll come back to Kate in a moment. I would just pick up on Councillor Otten's point, which I think is a really important one to just draw out around the relationship with China, because the retention of the relationship with Chengdu, which has been in place since 2010, has been done so on the grounds that there are significant cultural and educational ties in this city. A disproportionate number of students from the Chinese community in this city are from Sichuan province. There are cultural connections which go as far up to last weekend, when the Chengdu cultural dancers were here performing as part of the Lunar New Year Festival, Sheffield's biggest ever Lunar New Year Festival. And I think that is a real testimony to how a friendship agreement, a twinning relationship in that regard, can have many cultural, educational and friendship benefits spinning off from it, not just about economic benefits, but they are important as well. So I think you've drawn out a really important point there, and I'll hand back to Kate for any remarks you might want to make. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I think just acknowledging that we do have about 15,000 non-student Chinese population in the city, and pre-pandemic we had about 10,000 students from China as well, so still a significant community in our city. We're also looking at the moment at the Integrated Review Refresh 2023, which is part of the UK government policy around China as well, and kind of working through our understanding of that and how this applies. In relation to the recommendations and the discussion around NABLUS, as officers we will take away your reflections around the Palfest event and our strengthening and aligning that also with this new friendship arrangement as well.
Thank you very much, Kate. Councillor Williams has just indicated, apologies for missing you.
I don't think you did, I was late. It's just it's the wording actually of point J, which I think needs just a little bit of work. It talks about identifying the potential opportunities with South Korea. But in the actual document, under 1.8, it talks about identifying the potential opportunities with locations in South Korea. So I think it would, whether we could add an in somewhere, I think it would make it just consistent.
Thank you very much. So the proposal would be for recommendation J to say that would carry out further work in respect of identifying the potential opportunities with locations in South Korea. Or within, okay. Well, let's say with locations in to match the language that's used in later on in the report. Okay, thank you ever so much. That seems like a sensible amendment. So, there are a number of recommendations that the City Council relinquishes relationships, retains, but also I think it's worth drawing out the recommendation I that enter into a friendship agreement with NABLUS. So recommendations 1A to J, our colleagues happy to support those recommendations. Thank you. Recommendation 2, that the committee acknowledges the important role of the Lord Mayor in respect of fostering new international relationships and of helping to maintain existing links with partner cities. Colleagues happy to support recommendation 2? Brilliant, thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Kate. Right, item number 14. The multi-agency recovery following the Stannington, Malinbridge and Hillsborough gas outage. And whilst we're being joined by colleagues, I will just remind everybody that Appendix 1 at item 14, this item is not available to the public and press because it contains exempt information. If anyone did want to raise any specific questions about that information or refer to it, then we would need to go into a closed session and ask people to leave. This was a major incident in December 2022, and I know that many officers here in the room and also not here today worked tirelessly to support the recovery, as did members of the public, but also politicians, and including Councillor Baker, who isn't here today, but who I know spent many hours on the ground helping people, along with Councillor Williams as members for Stannington Ward. I'll hand over to colleagues. If you could all introduce yourselves first and then give us a brief summary of the report, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Kate Martin, Executive Director, City Futures, but also Chair of the Recovery Coordinating Group for the Stannington gas outage recovery arrangements.
Afternoon, everybody. Claire Hanson, the Emergency Resilience and Safety Manager for the City Council.
Afternoon, Richard Eyre, Director of Streets and Regulations.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So the report that you have in front of you today is an update report to share the ongoing recovery actions of the multi-agency recovery coordinating group following the significant gas outage and impacts that were experienced in Stannington, Malinbridge and Hillsborough in December 2022. As the Chair has pointed out, the impact was significant in this area, with over 3,000 properties being impacted over the course of the incident. A multi-agency recovery arrangement was put in place working with South Yorkshire Fire and Rescue, South Yorkshire Police, Cadent Gas, the local gas operator, Yorkshire Water, Northern Power Grid, DLUC, Ofgem, Ofwat, DEFRA, local community groups, and also the British Red Cross. The report that you have in front of you today shares an update some 12 months on around the Recovery Coordinating Group's actions and review and support as part of the incident response. It's important to set out that this recovery coordinating arrangement aligns with the Civil Contingencies Act and the arrangements that we have to adhere to as part of the Cabinet Office guidance and indicators for first and second tier responders, with the Council being one of those responders as well. In the body of the report set out in 1.6, it sets out a number of actions and activities that have been taken place, including firstly a review and debrief of multi-agency learning following the response phase. And this was chaired and independently commissioned as part of the review, working with all the partners that I've just set out as well. This external brief, as I said, was commissioned, and it covers areas of good practice that we saw as part of the response, but also looking to identify any areas of improvement or learning or reflections that we could also use should, in the unlikely event, a similar incident happen again, or as part of our broader emergency planning, regional and city arrangements as well. The detail that you have also in the report also discusses some recommendations around our learning resources and some of the collective learning that we've shared as part of the working with the local resilience forum, and also sets out some of the next stages moving forward, in particular around the review of local utility infrastructure, and that will be ongoing as part of a partnership arrangement moving forward from now, certainly into the next financial year. Okay. You also have in the information a short summary which sets out a public narrative and a helpful brief for the public as summary of some of the learning from this particular event. The coordinating group, its partnership and communication cells thought it important, due to the impact and the unprecedented nature of this incident, to share some early reflections and some early learning as well. And so the committee has a summary of that learning, and it very clearly sets out some of the fantastic responses that were achieved around the rapidness of mobilisation, the good communications, the technical responses that were achieved as well, some of the over and above compensation that was provided to local residents, and some of the learning as well. But it also identifies, as part of the review, some areas of strengthening for the future, and as I said, learning, including noting the potential to bring forward future trigger arrangements that would help the LRF, the Local Resilience Forum, assess the necessity to step up a major response as part of their good practice and guidance, but also setting out some learning around how we manage our data and information around vulnerable persons, and also some recommendations around IT connectiveness as well for supporting recovery. I'll pause there, and my other colleagues can also contribute as well, but I hope that helps walk through the work for over the last 12 months or so.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the team that's put this report together and done the work over the intervening months since the incident at the end of 2022. Councillor Williams has indicated you want to speak. Can I see if anyone else wants to come in? Councillor Johnson and Councillor Mohammed. Okay, I'll take those. Okay, take those three first, and then I'll come to the others. Councillor Williams first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your report. Yeah, it was unprecedented times last December at 1. And I remember it very well going with my colleagues, Penny Baker and Vicky Priestley, up to Stannington on that Saturday morning. I think in terms of the report, I will want to raise some issues under the closed session if I may, but I will try and stick to the right side of that line at the moment. I think the report is a good one, and but it's inevitable, as it's a multi-agency report, your case study, that there's something missing. And what's missing is the community getting together almost immediately, right the way through to the end. I went along to public meetings when they're discussing who had compensation, who hadn't, what happens next, what happens in 2 years' time when my boiler breaks down. And it was the community that helped themselves. Simple things like a neighbour calling on another neighbour, just to see if they're all right. Because for that first 48 hours, with all due respect, I don't think anybody had a clue what was coming down the track. And Stannington being not a flat place, the water was going all over the place. It almost became impossible to track where the water was going. Why did that house not get affected and that one next door did? It was organised chaos. And that's not a criticism of what happened, but I think the report should reflect on the self-help the community gave itself. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Williams. I know you've got a question you want to come back to. Councillor Hurst, you've also indicated you've got a question that will need to come into the closed session. Councillor Johnson, can I just ask, is your question relating to the closed part? No, okay.
No. It's just a very short comment again, say thanks for all the work that's done in bringing that report together, and thanks to everyone who was out in the field at that time for obvious reasons. I just wanted to say a quick special mention as Chair of Housing for all the people in the Housing Service, because he says, you know, people in the Housing Service obviously seem to get a lot of flack a lot of the time, but actually when it comes to the people out on the ground, you know, dealing with people in their homes in the cold and the wet, there they were. So, you know, thanks to everyone involved.
Thank you. Councillor Mohammed, do you have questions related to the closed part?
I think it's more of a public comment. I mean, obviously want to thank everyone that was involved in supporting the community. I mean, I take Councillor Williams' point in the community there was helping itself as well. There were lots of people looking after each other, particularly relatives who were taking elderly relatives with them. And obviously, I know the report talks about Stannington as a title, but obviously it was Stannington, Mainbridge, etc. The one thing that stuck out for me was that I really hope the utilities companies learn, because this year, Chair, there was another leak near the council estate, and so therefore the infrastructure, and it's not just a Stannington issue. I have to say, I spoke to colleagues in Leicestershire recently who also had a problem similar to this, and we were able to share our experiences. I think, you know, the difficulties that the people of Stannington went through, I really hope that any lessons that are learned can be shared, whether it's through the local government association or others, to actually say, look, this is what we did in Sheffield. We might not have got everything absolutely right on day one, but, you know, there were clear lessons to be learned, both for Cadent and others. And I think the only key thing for me, Chair, was that initially there were lots of attention on Stannington, and then as time went by, there was that handover period where responsibilities for stuff became a little bit more complicated. And I think it was, I remember there was a meeting that Penny chaired, and Penny would have spoken about this, that actually the lady called Mary that lived on the Acorn Estate got people together and actually highlighted to Yorkshire Water and others that actually stuff still was, because I remember going to see Mary with Penny, she had water coming out of a cooker and other stuff, and stuff hadn't been quite fixed because one bit of the utilities was trying to say, this is our responsibility over, we're handing it over, and it didn't seem to be working. So there are some other things to be learnt, Chair, but yeah, I would just want to personally thank everyone that was involved, because I have to say, when I was up there, it was incredibly cold, and I had the benefit of being able to go to a warm house where the people in Stannington and Merlin Bridge didn't.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mohammed. I've got Councillor Austin as well. Joe, is your question relating to the closed part or the open part?
Thanks for this. I'll just be brief. All I wanted to do was thank the team for bringing us this report. I did ask for it to come to Waste and Street Scene originally, but I recognise it's right for it to come here because it's not just the emergency planning, which is us, but it's a council-wide response that was given. But you know, I get regular briefings from Claire and Richard on the emergency planning side of it, and they've clearly put an awful lot of work into this, and the lessons to be learned for the future. So it was just a shout out for that is all I wanted to give. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you want to come back on the questions that have been raised so far, and then we'll need to pause, go into the closed session, and there's 2 questions for that part. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the thanks and the reflections around the significant effort all communities made, and some of the individual services will pass those thanks on, and also make sure the recovery coordinating group also have that feedback as well, so thank you for that. I think there was a comment about learning for the future. There are a couple of things that we have already been asked to engage with. One is a UK emergency planning event where we will share some of the practice and learning from this event, and SCC working with the LRF will do that to share with other bodies. And I think it was yourself, Councillor Mohammed, also said around the learning. Sadly, there has been another incident in Leicestershire, and our emergency planning team and the LRF were contacted to ask for advice and support, and we offered that at that time, and we'll continue that relationship and sharing learning. And it would also be great to see their learning as they go through this process now as well. A range of other matters in relation to the work around the working with the utility companies. Some of that is part of this next stage moving forward. This particular report just focuses on the recovery and the emergency response recovery elements. There are clearly infrastructure discussions and ongoing work that we as a city and also as a region would need to continue that engagement, and we'll bring more about that in the fullness of time as well. So that is ongoing. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Just to add to Councillor Mohammed's point about learning, Kate Joseph, the Chief Exec, met the Yorkshire Water Chief Exec early last year to instigate an operational group, which I now chair on a quarterly basis, to pick up learning from Stannington, but also to try and build that relationship and improve how we work with Yorkshire Water. And as part of that, Yorkshire Water came to Waste and Streets Committee in November last year to demonstrate accountability to the committee and the people of Sheffield. So it's an ongoing process, but it's definitely one we're mutually engaged in, and we are starting to work better together as partners, particularly looking at their infrastructure and how we make their infrastructure more sustainable.
Okay, thank you very much. So we will just need to then go into the closed session at the moment. So if we could pause the webcast